Chapter 231. 232. Spitting Blood. 1. The big streaming room was full of talented people. For the first time, Jiang Pingji felt that the audience in the streaming room was not completely useless. At least they were good at swearing. Qiguan Rang was dumbfounded. He had never thought that the elegant aristocratic son of the aristocratic family would actually swear. Even though he felt good when he heard it. He had never thought that Lu Shi would be such a Langjun. Qiguan Rang felt that he had opened the door to a whole new world. His troops shouted the same sentence in unison. Their voices echoed all over the mountain. The head of the entourage felt a sharp pain in his heart when he heard it. He almost choked on his breath. He looked at the dead bodies lying on the ground. His vision darkened. He staggered and almost fell on his butt. The old hunter crawled out of his hiding place. He did not dare to look back. His clothes were stained with the soldier's blood. The sticky and warm feeling on his hands scared him out of his wits. His face was as pale as paper. He crawled away on all fours. The reward for leading the way was tempting, but how could it compare to his own life? It would be a waste if he did not have the life to spend the money. He decided that he would never do such a dangerous job again. The head of the entourage was a man who cherished his life. Staying outside was not as safe as staying in the bandit village. At least there were buildings and shelters in the village to protect him from the arrows. However, when he and his subordinates left the dead bodies on the ground and arrived at the brightly lit bandit village, they were all shocked by the bloody scene inside. There were many more dead bodies than outside, and there were several arrows stuck in each of them. Some of the fatal wounds were not from the arrows, but they were still dead. They must have been killed after the battle. The head of the entourage, who had never cared about human lives, was so scared that his legs turned to jelly. He could not say a word. Chief. Chief. That looks like. Second Langjun, an injured soldier, was so scared that his legs were trembling. He pointed at a greenish-black corpse that emitted a strange aura with a trembling finger. What? The head of the entourage suddenly came to his senses. He quickly crawled toward the corpse. The corpse was very cold and hard. It gave off a rotten smell, but the face was still recognizable. At this moment, he finally understood why Meng Hun and his gang shouted, "The descendants lost their son and their food." Meng Liang's Langjun had already been killed. Touching the body, he felt like a piece of meat that had been frozen in an ice cellar. His heart sank deeper and deeper. Just by looking at the condition of the body, he could guess that Meng Liang had not been killed in the past few days. It was highly likely that he had already been killed when he was captured by Meng Hun. At this thought, the head of the entourage was so scared that his mind went blank. He felt a stabbing pain in his heart and spat out a mouthful of blood, but he swallowed it back. However, the matter that stimulated his nerves was not over yet. "Leader, there's no more food." The bandit stronghold was empty, and there was no trace of the mountain-like grain bags. The head of the entourage could not help but spit out a mouthful of blood. His eyelids rolled and he passed out. How could he not vomit blood? How could he not pass out from anger? Meng Liang had been killed a long time ago, but Meng Hun had created the illusion that Meng Liang was still alive and cheated the Mengs of their food. After taking the food, he made up those humiliating words. It was as if he was afraid that people would not know that he had killed Meng Liang and cheated the Mengs of their food. Meng Liang had killed his wife and daughter, so he took revenge. He killed Meng Liang and cheated the Mengs of 3,000 dawn of food. The Mengs were proud of that, but he just stood there and watched like a monkey show. He must have secretly mocked the Mengs for being as stupid as pigs. This was really a loss of a son and a loss of food. That was so frustrating. Do you feel good now? On the other side, Jiang Pingji was riding high. How can I not feel good? Meng Hun was so excited that his hands were shaking. He knelt on the ground and his strong body yielded to her. From now on, my life belongs to you, Lang Jun. You've given me a new life. You're like a second parent to me. In this life, I'm only willing to be at your beck and call. Even if you want my life, I'll do it without hesitation. Jiang Pingji stopped smiling and did not help him up. Instead, she said something meaningful. Remember your vow. Remember your vow today. No matter what happens, I hope your loyalty will not change. Although it was convenient to be a man, Jiang Pingji did not want to keep it a secret. One day, she would openly tell the world that Lu Shi was a proper woman, and not a legitimate child of the Lu family. People treated men and women differently. Men might be praised for doing the same thing, but women would be criticized for doing it. Jiang Pingji was very curious. If Meng Hun knew she was a woman, would he still be loyal to her? Meng Hun said firmly, if I break my vow, I'll be struck by lightning. Get up. It's cold on the ground. Jiang Pingji smiled and helped Meng Hun up. Yes, it feels good. But have you thought about what to do after that? Qiguan Rang, who was watching from the side, poured cold water on Meng Hun. Since I dared to do this, I've already thought of a way out. I'll only leave some people in the farm and the rest will pretend to be bandits. They'll clean up the bandits and recruit useful bandits to expand the size of the troop. Jiang Pingji said calmly, there are many bandits in the mountains in Hejin County. Even the government can't do anything about them. With this disguise, it'll be much easier to hide. The Mengs may send troops to retaliate. Qiguan Rang suddenly stopped. All the crimes were on Meng Hun's head. Even if the Mengs wanted to retaliate, they would dig deep to find Meng Hun, not the bandits in Hejin County. Meng Hun was not so kind as to go all the way to Hejin County to suppress bandits and increase the achievements of the Hejin County chief. TSK, so be it. No fool would stay in the same place after stirring up trouble. Jiang Pingji said indifferently, in 2 days, when the situation is less tense, I plan to let Meng Hun leave Hejin County and escape to other places to divert the Meng's attention. We haven't even dealt with the mess in Meng County in Tsang Prefecture. Where will we find so many troops to avenge our son? It was already a troubled time. The Meng still had a lot of problems to deal with. How could they want to find her? She would leave Hejin County in 2 or 3 months. If they could find her, she would admit defeat. Are we just going to leave the grain? Qiguan Rang asked. As for the grain, we'll store it in the cellar. I'll send someone to keep an eye on it. The most dangerous place is the safest. Those idiots all think that Meng Hun and his men have moved the grain away. Who would have thought that the grain was only moved from the surface to the underground? Chapter 232. Something bad happened. At dawn, the county chief of Hejin County was woken up by his servants from his bed. The county chief got up from his bed with sleepy eyes. What are you yelling for? You sleep first. I'll go and see what happened. The county chief's beloved concubine was also disturbed. She said in a coquettish tone, Master. It's not even dawn yet, something must have happened. The county chief of Hejin County was also angry. Anyone who was woken up from a sweet dream would be angry, not to mention the county chief of Hejin County, who had been living like a prince for many years. Gradually, he became a little angry in bed. He lifted the quilt, grabbed his clothes with one hand, and hurriedly went out. When he heard the servant's report, his remaining sleepiness disappeared instantly. He was so shocked that he almost fell to the ground. What did you say? Say it again. Who did you say died? The Hejin County chief's eyes were wide open like a pair of copper bells. His face was full of shock. He spoke so fast that his tongue could be twisted. What happened last night? Tell me in detail. The Hejin County chief grabbed the servant's collar and pulled him towards himself. The servant was so scared that he was trembling all over. As they were too close, the warm breath from the satrap's mouth hit his face. The servant became more nervous and repeated what he had just said, "Master. Master. Something big happened yesterday. It is said that the Langjun of the Mangs in Tsangzhou was poisoned by someone." The county chief of Hejin County was also stunned. He wished that it was just a nightmare and not the bad news he was hearing. Who is the Langjun of the Mangs in Tsangzhou? If the Langjun of the Mangs was in trouble in Hejin County, he wouldn't be too worried. However, he had a bad feeling. He was afraid that the Langjun was an important figure in the Mangs. What is his identity? The servant gasped and said with difficulty, "It was said that the Langjun of the Mangs was the second son of the Mangs. His name is Meng Liang. The second son of the Mangs." Hearing these 3 words was like a clap of thunder, directly causing him to be stunned on the spot. His legs went limp, and he actually lost his composure and sat on the ground. "Laleoi. Are you all right?" The servant was already afraid, and seeing the pillar of the family lose his composure, he became even more flustered. "Help me up." The Hejin County chief grabbed the servant's arm and stood up. At this moment, his mind was completely muddled. He deeply felt that his luck was terrible this year. What kind of Taisui did he offend? If not, why did the noblewoman of Hejin County almost die a few days ago, and now the second son of the Meng family was murdered? "Master, what should we do now?" The servant still remembered the scene a month ago when the head of the entourage broke into the city gate with his men and killed people. He didn't take the Hejin County chief seriously because he had a strong backer. If the Mengs want to make a fuss about it, I'm afraid, even though Meng Liang wasn't killed by the Hejin County chief, it was still someone who got into trouble in his territory. It was highly possible that the Meng family would implicate him in a fit of anger. The county chief of Hejin County was pulled back to reality by Meng Qi's words. He pulled himself together and pretended to be calm. "What are you afraid of? I'm a righteous man." The disciple of the Meng family came to Hejin County without receiving any news. "Can you blame me if something happens to him?" Although he said so, the Hejin County chief wasn't confident that he wouldn't be implicated. In a panic, he just wanted to find someone to give him some advice. Suddenly, he thought of Lu Shi. He slapped his thigh and said loudly, "Prepare the carriage. We're going to the Lu mansion." The servant nodded and said, "I'm going to prepare it now." But he didn't take 2 steps before he turned back. "Master, please forgive me. I almost forgot something else." The Hejin County chief asked impatiently, "What else is there? Say it in one breath. Don't waste time." The servant answered, "Yesterday, the guards at the city gate reported that there was a suspicious grain team." The Hejin County chief asked, "Are you saying that the grain team is the thief who killed Meng Liang?" "No. An old hunter came to the yamen this morning and got a shocking news. The grain that the grain team was escorting was prepared by the Mengs to exchange for Meng Liang with the thief. But the thief was vicious. He killed Meng Liang early and tricked the Mengs into sending the grain. The old hunter said that there was a bloody battle in the mountains last night. Half of the grain team was killed by the thief. There were only 20 or 30 soldiers left. They are all in the yamen now." The servant told the story without taking a breath. The county chief of Hejin County was stunned. He was shocked by the first news, but he had mixed feelings about the second news. He didn't like the Meng style, but he didn't expect the thief to be so bold. They killed people and cheated them of the grain. The Hejin County chief thought for a while and said, "Go to the yamen first, and then to the Lu mansion." Send someone to send the visiting card to the Lu County chief. It seemed like a peaceful day, but there was an undercurrent brewing in the dark that affected the pulse of Dongqing. The common people didn't notice it, but those who were well-informed reacted. The survivors of the grain team were all from the Mangs, so they were tight-lipped. But there was also an old hunter who escaped from death. He didn't have a high level of awareness, so he didn't keep his mouth shut. With a little coercion and a little temptation, he would spill everything. Of course, it included the 2 sentences that the troops said to ridicule the Mangs. It was ridiculous that Meng Gongyong of the previous dynasty said that his descendants were worse than dogs. And the second sentence, which was even more infuriating, said that Meng Gongyong killed the enemy and brought peace to the world, but his descendants lost their children and grain. Even a blind man could tell that the culprit who kidnapped and murdered Meng Liang was trying to humiliate the Mangs. Because of the fear of the Mangs, people didn't dare to say it out loud. But they despised the thief in their hearts. They were one of the 4 noble families of Dongqing, but now they were being ridiculed by the thief. Thinking about how brave Meng Gongyong was in the past, it was sad that his descendants had come to this. For a while, the 2 sentences spread among the people as if they had wings. No matter what era the people were in, they were always interested in gossip. Their love for fun had never changed. Before the Hejin County chief came to visit, Lu Shi had heard several versions of the story. He was speechless. He knew who did it and he was mentally prepared. But when he heard the news, he was still touched. Give me some advice. If even you can't do anything, the arrogant Mangs won't let me go. The Hejin County chief was so anxious that his mouth was bubbling. Lu Shi smiled and shook his head. He elegantly poured a cup of tea for the Hejin County chief and said slowly. Chapter 233. The Hejin County chief thought it made sense. 2, but he was only a county chief in name only. How could he have so many soldiers to catch the bandits? Just taking care of the guards in the county governor manor who were just there to keep up appearances was already a stretch for him. He sighed and said shamefully, Brother Lu, you don't know. Even though I have the title of a county chief, I can't be compared to you. Without any real power in their hands, they had neither food nor manpower. How could they eliminate the bandits around them? How can I let the people live and work in peace? I have the heart, but I can't do anything to those bandits. If there were people with food, why would they let the bandits grow and disturb the people? He also had great ambitions. He wanted to be a good county chief and work for the people. However, there were too many powerful Buddhas in Hejin County. As a powerless county chief, he could only be an obedient mute and retire peacefully. In the past, he had tried to gather people to suppress the bandits, but at that time, the bandits had already become very powerful and could not be mobilized. Lu Shi sighed helplessly. He seemed to sympathize with his old classmate. After a while, Lu Shi hesitated and said, You and I have known each other for a long time and we are classmates. I can't just watch you being attacked by the Mangs and ignore it. The only way out is to catch the bandits who killed Meng Langjun. If you lack manpower, why don't you borrow some people from other families in the name of suppressing the bandits for the people? It's fine if no one gives you some food. The county chief of Hejin County looked embarrassed. This solution could solve the urgent situation, but he would lose face. The families that Lu Shi mentioned were the other gentry families in Hejin County. The county chief felt like he was begging for money. Seeing the county chief hesitate, Lu Shi said righteously, My family doesn't have many resources. Even though we have some property, we are only the second branch. We can't take over the family, so there's a limit to what we can do. If you don't mind, I'm willing to give you 100 servants to help you suppress the bandits. The gentry families were big and had many servants. But the number of servants to guard the house was fixed and the number was fixed. After all, it didn't take too many people to look after the house. If there were too many, it would be equivalent to raising another mouth to eat without doing anything. Under normal circumstances, if the Heijin County chief went out to borrow people from other families, he wouldn't be able to borrow many. Of course, the wealthy families that secretly raised private armies were an exception. 100 people was a huge number and a generous one. How could the Heijin County chief not be shocked? Even the previous few times when they were suppressing the bandits, they only mobilized 100 or 200 soldiers. The county chief of Heijin County calmed down and relaxed his frown. If it weren't for the inappropriate situation, he would have laughed out loud. Brother, you've really helped me a lot. Regardless of whether we can catch those thieves or not, I will owe you a big favor. Lu Shi also broke into a smile and said a few words humbly. He looked like he was doing it for the sake of brotherhood. The Heijin County chief naturally had to return the favor after receiving such a big favor. The 100 people were like 100 mouths. The Lus had already sent people, they couldn't ask them to give back food. Therefore, he decided to pay a visit to the other landowning households later and ask them if they could give him some food or not. After all, to these landowning households, people were more valuable than food. Anything that could be solved with food was nothing. Training servants required energy, money, and material resources. If the people they lent out were lost, they would suffer a great loss. In comparison, it was more cost-effective to send people off with a batch of food. With Lu Shi taking the lead, the other families couldn't be too stingy. They would more or less give some food. Although it was a bit embarrassing, it was worth it if they could get through this crisis. The Heijin County chief felt better when he thought about it. After Jiang Pingji finished dealing with the follow-up matters, she received a message from the gatekeeper asking her to see Lu Shi. Father, what can I do for you? Jiang Pingji was a bit confused. Lu Shi wouldn't scold her because of what happened last night, would he? Father has found a few free suckers for you. Jiang Pingji was confused. What suckers? Lu Shi smiled and took a sip of tea. He told her about the visit from the Heijin County chief. You should have 100 people in your troops, right? If you are willing, you can lend them to the Heijin County chief. He will be in charge of the troops, but you can make all the decisions secretly. You can divide the spoils of war. As for the captured bandits, I will talk to him and give him a clear path. Jiang Pingji had secretly suppressed the bandits and recruited usable bandits into the troops. It was a good idea, but it was not a good way to explain if they were discovered. Lu Shi wanted to use this opportunity to give her a clear path and get a call from the Heijin County chief. Of course, the 100 people belonged to his daughter, so it was not appropriate for Lu Shi to make the decision for her. If Jiang Pingji was not willing, Lu Shi planned to send 100 people from his guards to the Heijin County chief. Jiang Pingji listened and thought about it carefully. She was a bit tempted. Giving her a clear path was only one of the benefits. The other was that during the suppression of the bandits, all the expenses of the troops would be paid by the public account. What did it mean by paying the public account? The chief of Heijin County collected food from various aristocratic families and used it all to feed Jiang Pingji's troops. Jiang Pingji didn't have to spend a single cent. Although some of the spoils of war would be taken by the chief of Heijin County, she had more choices about the captured bandits and even other benefits. In layman's terms, it was using other people's money to feed one's own troops. There were many gentry families in Heijin, so they had more money and food. No matter how stingy those people were, they would pay a little for the sake of their reputation. The total amount of food was very considerable. Jiang Pingji felt that they could eat some of it and carry some of it away. Of course. After all, the benefits far outweigh the disadvantages. The bandits near Heijin must be eliminated. In the past, we could only do it secretly. Now we have a good reason to do it, and there will be people who will pay for the expenses. Wouldn't it be unfair to myself if I don't accept such a good offer? It was not easy to start from scratch. One would not know the cost of food if one did not manage the household. The scale of the troops was still small. When the number of people reached thousands or even tens of thousands, she would not be able to feed so many people with her current wealth. Therefore, it was very important to increase income and reduce expenditure. Lu Shi's move helped her solve a problem and saved her a lot of expenses. He pressed his lips together as if he wanted to suppress the smile on his face, but the gentle smile in his eyes betrayed his true feelings. Since you have agreed, I will inform the Hejin County chief tomorrow. Lu Shi paused and then asked in a low voice, have you cleaned up the aftermath of the incident with Meng Liang? Father, don't worry. It has been done, Jiang Pingji answered with certainty. The father and son looked at each other and smiled. They both saw the slyness in each other's eyes. At that moment, the news of Meng Liang, the second son of the Mengs, being murdered spread like wildfire. Chapter 234. 235. Spitting Blood. 4. The Hejin County chief put aside his pride and collected more than 1,000 don of food and various weapons. As he had expected, no one except Lu Shi was willing to give them to others. They chose to pay with money. He thought that Lu Shi's men were the elites he had raised in Hu County, so he was very confident about killing the bandits. He organized the money into a booklet and handed it to Lu Shi with both hands. He also told Lu Shi that he was not good at dispatching and hoped that Lu Shi would pay more attention to him. After all, they were Lu Shi's soldiers. Although Lu Shi said that he would lend them to him, it was not appropriate for the Hejin County chief to interfere. Of course, Lu Shi wouldn't refuse the supplies that were delivered to his doorstep. He politely declined them and accepted them under the urging of the Hejin County chief. With a turn of his head, he handed them over to his daughter. Jiang Pingji was speechless. She had only lied to them and a lot of food and money had been delivered to her. She finally understood why the Lus were so rich. Lu Shi did not see through her thoughts. She hinted, the Hejin County chief can't eat or sleep well. He is eager to see the bandits killed. Jiang Pingji's heart skipped a beat. She understood the meaning of his words and nodded in response. Father, don't worry. I know what to do. They had to kill the bandits, but she had the final say on who to kill. She just needed to show a good record. The Hejin County chief would probably be grateful and think that Lu Shi was a good friend and that Lu Shi was a hero. Anyway, the father and son would take all the material and reputation benefits. Others would be happy even if they suffered a loss. Lu Shi was worried. The tallest tree in the forest will be destroyed by the wind. The tallest tree on the shore will be destroyed by the current. People are stupid. Those who are outstanding are easy to be envied and criticized. As your father, I don't want you to suffer such grievances. Therefore, when necessary, Lanting can keep a low profile and avoid the limelight of others' fights. You should focus on the result. There is no need to fight for a temporary victory. Others did not know about her future, but Lu Shi knew her ambition and talent. He saw with his own eyes that the child could still be free and unfettered after hurting the Mengs. If it were someone else, would they be able to do that? She had already built a foundation by developing steadily. Her future development would be smoother. Once she was fully fledged, all she needed was a fortuitous encounter, and she would be able to rise to the top in an instant, shocking the people of the world and shaking the entire court. Father, don't worry. I'm not a brainless brute. Jiang Pingji answered with a smile. Lu Shi nodded his head in satisfaction, but then realized that there was something wrong with his words. She was his daughter. While Jiang Pingji was preparing to exterminate the bandits and catch the murderer, who killed the Lang Jun of the Mangs. The head of the entourage of the Mangs was escorting Meng Liang's coffin back to Meng County in Song Prefecture. She wore a white silk mourning dress, a white banner hung high, paper money fluttered in the wind, and the soul guiding bell rang all the way. Meng Liang had been dead for quite some time. In order to prevent maggots from rotting and to preserve his body in perfect condition, they had specially made a special coffin and placed a large amount of ice inside. They were rushing to send Meng Liang's body back to his homeland before the beginning of summer. However, it was difficult to speed up while carrying a coffin. It should have taken them only half a month to travel at top speed, but it took them a month and a half. They had lost count of how many times they had waited for a month and a half. By then, Jiang Pingji had expanded the number of troops to 1,000 after exterminating the bandits. That was the result of her being picky. If she had slightly loosened the selection criteria, she would have had about 2,000 troops. In a month and a half, they had conquered more than 20 bandits' villages and secretly used them as strongholds. They had looted countless spoils of war. She had handed over all her antiques, calligraphy, and paintings. She had kept all her food, cotton, and money. The Hejin County chief was well aware of her actions, but he did not say anything. In that era, knowledge was priceless. The value of calligraphy, paintings, and antiques far exceeded the value of food. However, that rule did not apply to Jiang Pingji. She knew that only by strengthening herself would she be able to survive in this chaotic world. Antiques, calligraphy, and paintings would all be hers in the future. Therefore, she handed over those things that looked expensive but were just old rolls of paper in her eyes without hesitation. She did not care, but the Hejin County chief felt that she was too honest and upright. She had suffered a great loss without saying a word. She had benefited from it. He was especially merciful to the captured bandits. It was up to the Lus to decide how to deal with them. The only regret was that they had not caught the bandit who killed Meng Liang, Meng Hun. But the Hejin County chief felt comfortable when he thought that the hidden dangers around Hejin County were decreasing day by day. He was also secretly envious of Lu Shi. Looking at the elite troops of Lu Shi and his own troops, the gap was too big. The former was serious about exterminating bandits. Blood flowed like a river at every turn. The latter was chased by bandits and could only let them grow. As the size of the troops increased, Meng Hun temporarily hid behind the scenes. Su Ke had to shoulder the double workload. Su Ke was so busy every day that he had no time to rest. If Qiguan Rang did not occasionally come to help him, he would have been exhausted. When he finally had some free time, he turned around and found that his Lengjuan's troop had already expanded to 1,000 people. 1,000 private troops was nothing in front of any noble family. But considering the time it took for the troops to be established and the current situation, it could only be described as incredible. Even though Su Ke had seen the development of the troops with his own eyes, he was still a little stunned. Rang, Xiaoyu has been busier lately. Qiguan Rang and Wei Yuan's daughter's wedding date was set in 8 months. Although it was a long time, they still had to go through a complicated ceremony. 8 months was considered a rush. If Wei Yuan was not in a hurry to get his daughter married, it could have been delayed for more than a year. Qiguan Rang was now the future groom. He was in high spirits and the haze between his eyebrows was swept away. It's not as leisurely as Wenjing, Su Ke said lightly. He and Qiguan Rang had been interacting more and more, and they had many common topics. Eventually, they became friends. You and Master Gong Chao have already decided to choose Lang Jun. Why haven't you expressed your opinion yet? Jiang Pingji's secret forces were developing rapidly, but there was no hidden danger of an unstable foundation. Instead, it was very solid. This was inseparable from Su Ke's hard work. However, one person's ability was limited. He only had so much energy. When there were only 100 people in the troops, he was in charge of the internal affairs and Meng Hun was in charge of the external affairs. They could manage the troops in an orderly manner. Now, Meng Hun could not show his face in public because of the sensitive timing. A lot of work was piled on him. Plus, the troops had expanded 10 times, so naturally, his work had increased by more than 10 times. There was no salary increase, and he had no colleagues to share his work with. Chapter 235. Su Ke was a smart man. He could tell that Qiguan Rang liked his Lang Jun. If that was the case, why didn't he join them? If he joined them now, he could immediately push all the internal affairs to Qiguan Rang. He would be completely free. Su Ke worked overtime every day, and he had dark circles under his eyes. He was a young man who looked tired all day. Those who didn't know him would think that he was having sex every night. It's not the right time. Qiguan Rang forced a smile, but he wasn't good at that kind of expression. The curve of his mouth was stiff. Time? Su Ke asked, isn't this the right time? How could adding flowers to a brocade be compared to providing timely help? How could the insignificant friendship with Lang Jun be compared to when she had a firm foothold in the future? Qiguan Rang glanced at Su Ke and said, Dongqing still exists, and the royal family still has some power. It's not the right time yet. Su Ke was silent for a while. He vaguely understood what Qiguan Rang was implying. As long as Dongqing still existed, Jiang Pingji couldn't develop her business freely. The shop was small, and Su Ke could manage it all by himself. There was no point for Qiguan Rang to join them now. Other than sharing Su Ke's workload and helping him get off work on time every day. He would wait for the time when Jiang Pingji really needed him. If it was someone else, he would have been furious if he showed the intention to assist Jiang Pingji but refused to join them. What made Qiguan Rang gratified was that Jiang Pingji could completely understand and support his modesty. It was a tacit understanding between him and Jiang Pingji. They were both teachers and friends, and they got along well. Because of that, Qiguan Rang would occasionally come over to help Su Ke with some of his work. Su Ke's face turned pale. He said gloomily, I can only hope that the time comes soon, otherwise, according to his Lang Jun's development, he would definitely die of exhaustion. His Lang Jun was too good at delegating work. Laymen don't care about professionals. Qiguan Rang stopped him from saying anything. Qiguan Rang looked at Su Ke and teased, Xiaoyu, you're at the age to get married. Why don't you take some time to think about it? No matter how unreasonable Lu Langjun is, he can't possibly ignore his subordinate's marriage, right? Seeing that the young man was dating, getting married, and having a baby, she should at least give him a few days off. Qiguan Rang did not want to join the team at this time because he saw the heavy workload and wanted to relax for a few more days. After hearing this, Su Ke's face turned red and pale. He seemed to be in a dilemma. When Zheng's suggestion is really, could he say that Qiguan Rang was very similar to his Lang Jun in some aspects? If Jiang Pingji knew how busy Su Ke was, she would probably say the same thing. Suddenly, Su Ke changed his mind. He hoped that the time for Qiguan Rang to join them would come later. He could not imagine what would happen if his Lang Jun and Qiguan Rang got together. He would be the one who would be exhausted. Qiguan Rang pursed his lips and said, Xiaoyu, you don't have to be so depressed. Once Lu Langjun's name spreads, there will naturally be talents coming to visit. Su Ke still had a hopeless expression on his face. Wait until then. He guessed that he had already died of exhaustion at his post. Although Jiang Pingji was a hands-off boss, it did not mean that she did not care about anything. Sans Hisong Ningshi, the streamer has been going shopping for the past 2 days. I feel a little bored, Luxio was Hao Liao Chao, #propping chin. The The streamer is not a 10,000-year-old primary school student. There will be incidents wherever she goes. Recently, the streamer has been watching all kinds of bandit suppression series. It was exciting at first, but it got boring after a while. Now, shopping and drinking are like watching a gourmet show. A month and a half had passed, and the streaming room's upper limit was still 10,000 people. Jiang Pingji streamed every day. With the flow of people in the streaming room and all kinds of gifts, she had accumulated 986,000 points of popularity. In a few days, she would break through the million mark. The system looked at the popularity points enviously. It tried to persuade Jiang Pingji to use them to increase the level of the streaming room, but she had heartlessly rejected it. In the end, the system was so angry that it could not do anything to her. Tudu Feicho, I think it's okay. Anyway, I think the streamer's streaming is good. Also, think about the pile of work on Suku's desk. If the streamer streamed how to deal with them, I think it would be even more boring. When the bullet screen was sent, the audience in the streaming room was silent for a second. Then, they all laughed, ha ha ha, because they felt sorry for Suku. Sherry Didoli, Suku is really unlucky to have a Zhou Bapi like the streamer. Kojiao Chi fan, if I had a boss like her, would strongly request 5 insurances, 1 housing fund, and most importantly, a raise in salary. Jiang Pingji sat at a noodle stall by the street, eating bland noodles. Her eyes were secretly looking at the screen, but her ears were listening to the conversation of the customers. She was multitasking. She added a bullet screen from the streamer. Streamer V, I just passed by the cloth shop. Didn't I ask Takshu to pick some new cloth for him and his aunt? Jiang Pingji thought about it carefully. It seemed that Suku's current living standard was not bad, and he did not have any other needs. She asked the servants to prepare some cloth, rice, and silver for him and sent them all to his aunt. Is that a raise in salary? Yinuagia Zhuge Chinma, that makes sense. Suku is speechless. But you forgot the most important thing, the vacation. It was good to give him a raise, but he did not have time to enjoy the money he earned. He was so tired all day. Suku still deserved to be distressed. Jiang Pingji coughed in her heart. Streamer V, as the saying goes, capable people do more work. Now we are short of manpower. Write down the vacation for him first and put it together later. She said it nicely, but not only Suku, but even the audience in the streaming room did not believe her. Their Longjuan's daily activities were either suppressing bandits or eating and drinking. As her subordinate, how could Suku not feel bad? Regarding this, Jiang Pingji expressed that she was wronged. Suppressing bandits and making trouble was true, but she did not admit to eating and drinking. Every day, she went out shopping with a proper purpose. After finishing the noodles, Jiang Pingji took out 3 copper coins to pay. The other customers also left. Back at the mansion, Jiang Pingji went to the study and took out the property account book that Suku had made. All kinds of items were carefully categorized and looked very clear. She put down the book and took the bamboo paper from the corner of the desk. There were all kinds of data listed on it. Tudu Feicho, I haven't been here for a few days. What are you reading? Chapter 236. 237, Vomiting Blood, 6, Let You See a Baby, Musician Juga Chinma, I don't even need to help you to the toilet. The streamer's handwriting is elegant and flamboyant, but to put it bluntly. What the hell is she writing? How can you understand it? You live up to your ID. Jiang Pingji's handwriting was just like her personality. She did whatever she wanted. In the past, she would follow Lu Shi's handwriting and write in an orderly manner. But ever since she used charcoal to write and draw on coarse cloth, she seemed to have opened a door to a whole new world. Her handwriting became wilder and wilder. She completely let go of herself, and her handwriting was even more sloppy than wild cursive. Musician Juga Chinmo, you're flattering me. Tutu Fecho, if this is really the record for the grain price. Does it mean that the streamer's plan is about to begin? In the streaming room, even though the content was boring, the passion of the viewers did not diminish. As the streaming room gained fame, more and more people believed in it. The viewers found it harder to watch the stream. Every seat was hard to get. Even if you had been single for 30 years and had a 100 megabit internet speed, you might not be able to get one. What was worse was that the streaming room could not be broadcasted. If the viewers wanted to watch the stream, they would have to wait for the video to be broadcasted on Baidu the next day. Tutu Fecho could be considered a veteran in the streaming room. He kept up with the updates. He recorded everything that happened around the streamer during the stream and even compiled a booklet for it. As soon as he heard that the grain price had skyrocketed, he immediately thought of Jiang Pingji's plan to suppress the grain price. It was as if he had been injected with chicken blood. Jiang Pingji shook her head. It's not the right time. She had been walking the streets and alleys. She had visited the tea houses, eateries, and taverns. She had heard the people talking about the recent gossip. More and more of it was related to the civil unrest in Tsang Prefecture and Meng County. But their news had not been confirmed, so the spread was limited. Otherwise, why would the grain price have only doubled? Jiang Pingji murmured, it's too early to make a move. The rumors are still brewing. There's still some time before they really explode. When the time comes, the people will panic and rush to the grain stores to buy grain. The grain price will not be the same as it is today. Some of the people would believe the baseless rumors, but the doubling of the grain price would make them hesitate. If Jiang Pingji started her plan now, her family's grain store would be emptied by another force. When the food shortage started, most of the people would have to grit their teeth and buy the food that had skyrocketed in price. So, she was not in a hurry. When the government of Heijin County confirmed the news of the civil unrest in Sangzhou, the people would panic and find that they could no longer afford to buy food. That would be the time for Jiang Pingji to strike. She took a look at Suku's statistical report and found that they had achieved great results in suppressing the bandits in the past month. The money collected was exchanged for food, which was purchased from the nearby Zisong County at regular prices. It added up to about 1,500 dong. The 3,000 dong she had extorted from the Mangs and the 1,300 dong the Heijin County chief had collected from various aristocratic families. After deducting the food consumed during this period of time, she still had 5,500 dong left, which was much more than she had expected. Takshu, go and tell the butler to call the shopkeeper of the grain store over. Here. The second branch of the Lus owned all kinds of stores. Half of them were Gu Min's dowry, and the other half were bought by Lu Shi over the years. The Lus had 3 grain stores in Heijin. They were located in different areas and had different customers. Daily necessities such as rice, oil, salt, soy sauce, vinegar, and tea did not make a lot of money, but every person needed them, and the demand was huge. Therefore, the profits of those stores were moderate every year. As long as the shopkeepers followed the rules, it would be difficult for them to make a loss. The 3 shopkeepers were a little scared when they were suddenly summoned by their master. They were afraid that they had done something wrong and would be fired. Don't be so nervous. I called you here to ask you some questions. Jiang Pingji sat at the head of the table and asked one of them in a cold voice, how's the business these days? The shopkeeper answered respectfully, the business is okay. The people are worried about the civil unrest in Sangzhou, so the grain is selling smoothly. Is there anything else? The shopkeeper was startled. He thought carefully and said, apart from some scattered purchases, there are many big businesses. The so-called big businesses were actually other grain stores planning to buy in bulk from them. But the shopkeepers were not stupid. They knew that the price of grain was rising fast, so they could wait for a while and sell slowly after the price rose to another level. Anyway, no matter where the grain was, they would not lose money. The only difference was whether they could make more or less. You sold the grain? Jiang Pengji asked. In order to have a continuous supply, the grain stores would more or less have some grain in storage. The shopkeeper hurriedly said, I wouldn't dare to do that. Of course, I have to ask my master before I make a decision. Jiang Pingji nodded with satisfaction and said, just follow the price of grain these days. If the people want to buy in bulk, you can sell it as usual. If someone wants to buy in bulk, you don't have to ask for permission. Just say yes. The three shopkeepers hesitated. In their opinion, it was a good opportunity to make money. They should limit the sale and wait for the grain price to rise before selling. It would definitely be more profitable than selling it now. Jiang Pingji did not intend to explain. She only said coldly, just do as I say. I will have other instructions when the time comes. All merchants were unscrupulous. Merchants were born with the instinct to pursue profits. No matter what era it was, this had never changed. But for Jiang Pingji, the main purpose of the plan was not to make money, but to gain fame. Or rather, she wanted to earn both money and fame. To others, it seemed impossible, but the opportunity was right in front of her. She had to seize it. The three shopkeepers looked at each other. But Jiang Pingji was their master. Lu Shi had never cared about the family affairs, Madame who had always allowed Jiang Pingji to do whatever she wanted, and the second lady had no reason to support her. The shopkeepers had no choice but to listen to her. Yes. The three of them replied in unison. You may leave now. Remember to report back if anything happens. When Heijin County was in turmoil due to the civil unrest in Song Prefecture, the Meng's entourage finally arrived at Meng County in Song Prefecture before the weather got hotter. Meng County was a wasteland. The streets were empty, and there was not a soul to be seen. The sun hung high in the sky, and everyone felt a chill. The white banners fluttered in the wind, making a rustling sound. It made the scene even more desolate. Even though the Meng County chief's mansion had been burned down by Meng Hun, Meng Zhan still had a luxurious mansion. Chapter 237. 238, Spitting Blood, 7, Who are you? The soldier saw the coffin on the carriage from far away. Seeing that they still wanted to get closer, he took out his knife and stopped them. This is the Meng's territory. You lowly people, leave now. Don't you dare dirty the eyes and ears of the nobles. The head of the entourage rolled down from the carriage in a sorry state. His face was covered with tears. His head and waist were wrapped in white cloth, and his body was draped in linen clothes. His face was unkempt, and his eyes were bloodshot. His eye bags were heavy, and his face was covered in a layer of dirty oil. He looked extremely unkempt. I have something urgent to report to the Lord. Second Lang Jun. Second Lang Jun is back. He cried as he spoke. He knelt on the ground and took out his token with trembling fingers. The words carved on it could prove his identity. The soldier didn't know how to read, but he recognized the token. His attitude suddenly changed. What? Second Lang Jun is back. The soldier's expression changed. He was about to flatter Meng Liang to leave a good impression when he saw the coffin on the carriage. All of a sudden, an ominous feeling spread from his back to the back of his head. He felt numb all over. Could it be? Could it be that the person in the coffin was Second Lang Jun, Meng Liang? This conjecture shocked the soldier. Hurry up and report to the Lord. Second Longjuan's body is back. Hurry up. The head of the entourage didn't dare to face Meng Zhan's anger. He roared at the soldier. The soldier was also shocked by the series of events. In a daze, he staggered and ran towards the Meng residence. For a moment, he did not expect the fury of the informant. Meng Zhan was having tea and wine with his friend in the waterside pavilion. They sat opposite each other, talking about the world and laughing. But the atmosphere didn't last long. The servant made a lot of noise. His rude behavior made Meng Zhan very angry. The Mengs were one of the 4 noble families in Dongqing. They were very strict. Even the lowest servant had the best manners. No one could find fault with them. It was like when he was entertaining a guest. Even if his friend didn't care, Meng Zhan still felt embarrassed when something so embarrassing happened. Perhaps something happened. Why don't you ask, County Chief Meng? The friend smiled warmly, and his eyes were calm like the clouds in the sky, causing others to feel a sense of closeness and peace. Meng Zhan held back his anger. He cupped his hands in front of his chest and said, I didn't teach my servant well. Please forgive me. After saying that, he turned his head and his face darkened. He got up and walked towards the rash servant. Meng Zhan looked impatient. Tell me, what happened? The servant shivered and tried to lower his body to the ground, trying to minimize his presence. Only then did Meng Zhan realize that there was an unfamiliar soldier beside the servant. Judging by his attire, he should be a guard of the Mengs. All of a sudden, Meng Zhan's anger grew. This was the place where he entertained his distinguished guests. A guard guarding the gate of the courtyard dared to break in. If this was seen by others, how could he not laugh at the Meng family for not being strict enough to control a mere servant? However, before he could get angry, the soldier had already finished speaking while trembling. Master! Master! Second Longjuan's body has been brought back. Meng Zhan's mind went blank after he heard it. It was as if thunder exploded in his ears and took away his hearing. After a long time, Meng Zhan regained his senses and grabbed the soldier's collar. His rough movement also startled the guests in the waterside pavilion. What did you say? Whose body has been brought back? Meng Zhan's eyes were wide open. His crazy look was a sharp contrast to his usual gentle and elegant appearance. The soldier became more and more nervous, but he still answered subconsciously, Second Longjuan's body has been brought back, Second Longjun. Meng Zhan was so scared that he took a step back. His body hit the pillar of the waterside pavilion. It was as if all his strength had been sucked out. The group of servants were so scared that they knelt on the ground and didn't dare to raise their heads. His friend who was staying in the waterside pavilion heard the commotion and was confused. He was about to stand up, but he saw Meng Zhan holding his chest with his right hand and spitting out a mouthful of blood. His eyes rolled back and he fell into the pond. Witnessing all of this, the friend's expression was slightly startled, and he stopped in his tracks. What? What happened? Meng Zhan spat out blood and fell into the pond. Everyone was so shocked that they forgot to go into the water to save him. In the end, his friend came back to his senses and asked someone to jump into the water to save Meng Zhan, who was in a coma. Meng Zhan woke up from his coma in a daze. He saw the familiar scenery and his friend next to his bed. He was shocked at first, but then he remembered the news he heard before he passed out. He quickly lifted the quilt. County Chief Meng, the doctor just came to check on you. You are in shock. You need to rest. Meng Zhan suddenly burst out a strong force. He raised his hand and pushed his friend away. His eyes were full of hatred. Bring him here. Meng Zhan was so angry that he almost bit his tongue. Who killed Meng Zhan? Meng Zhan. His friend stood up awkwardly. He was shocked when he heard the name. Wasn't that the name of the second Lang Jun of the Mangs? What happened? Seeing Meng Zhan leave in anger, the friend's shocked expression returned to normal. He even tidied up his hair and clothes. He thought to himself, did something really happen to the second Lang Jun of the Mangs? Thinking about the young friend he met before he came to Meng County, the man raised his eyebrows and his eyes flashed with a hint of playfulness. Don't tell me, you've already predicted this. He followed Meng Zhan and followed him to the hall where Meng Liang's coffin was placed. The servants had put on plain linen clothes, and the decorations in the room had been changed as well. White banners were fluttering, and candles were burning. It looked like a mourning hall, with a giant coffin in the middle. As soon as he walked in, a strong rancid smell lingered in his nose. Meng Zhan lost his composure and pushed open the lid of the coffin. The body inside was already rotten and covered with maggots. Meng Liang had been dead for almost 3 months, and the weather was getting hotter and hotter. There was no place to replenish the ice along the way, so the body could not be preserved. It was normal for maggots to grow. However, the more it was like this, the greater the blow to Meng Zhan. Even though he didn't believe that the person in the coffin was his son, he could still see the outline of Meng Liang from the maggot-covered face. This was his son. Seeing this, Meng Zhan's throat hurt again. Blood spilled out from the corner of his mouth. This scene caused everyone to be shocked again and again. The friend secretly raised his eyebrows. As he was about to leave, there was a fragrant wind. He saw a lady in luxurious clothes lying on the coffin, crying. She looked like a pear blossom in the rain. It was a pitiful sight. However, with such thick makeup on her face, it was impressive that she didn't make a mess of her face when she cried. The friend thought to himself. He then heard the lady call the second Lang Jun in the coffin as her son. Wait, wasn't Meng Liang's mother the second wife of the county chief of Hu County, Lu Shi? The friend's eyes widened. Chapter 238. 239, Spitting Blood, 8. His friend stopped looking at him and comforted him gently. County Chief Meng, I'm sorry for your loss. Don't be too sad. However, the pain of losing a son in his middle age was not something that could be soothed by a few words of comfort. Meng Zhan held the edge of the coffin with both of his hands. His fingers were visibly shaking. Because he was using too much strength, the tips of his fingers had turned white. Seeing his veins bulging and his face dark, his friend didn't say anything else. He just sighed and stepped aside. Obviously, Meng Zhan didn't need someone else to comfort him. He needed a quiet place where he could calm down and recover from the sudden shock. However, Meng Zhan didn't want to be alone. He just wanted to figure out why Meng Liang died. His son was fine. Even though he had some small problems and made some mistakes, so what? The Mengs had been a prominent family since the founding of the previous dynasty. They had a huge business and they could handle anything for Meng Liang. If he had known this would happen when he sent him to Shangjing, he would have shouldered all the pressure and protected him under his wings. Now, he was on the road to hell at such a young age. As an old father, he had to watch his son die before him. Meng Zhan was a man after all. He was stronger than his crying concubine. After spitting blood a few times, he managed to regain some of his sanity. Bring him here. I want to ask, just who is so daring that he actually dared to be so ruthless towards little Ro? Meng Zhan's eyes turned red and blue veins popped up on his forehead. He didn't look like the gentle and gentleman he used to be. He looked like he had aged 20 years. His friends didn't know whether to leave or stay. They could only put on a serious face and lower their own sense of existence. Not long after, the head of the entourage knelt down in front of Meng Liang's coffin. His stubbled face was covered with tears. The one who killed second Lang Jun was the thief, Meng Hun. He lied to the master. The head of the entourage was anxious. Fear was lingering in his brain. He thought Meng Zhan would stand up and cut his head off in the next second. Meng Zhan smiled coldly. He looked vicious and ferocious. Tell me everything. Meng Hun, he. His friend frowned. It was the first time he had seen Meng Zhan's expression other than a warm smile. Meng Zhan's whole body was filled with hostility, which made people uncomfortable. But considering that Meng Zhan had just lost his beloved son, it was not too much. The head of the entourage secretly clenched his fists. Whether he could keep his life or not depended on this. After gathering his emotions, the head of the entourage told the story that he had been preparing for over a month. He tried to focus on Meng Hun's treachery and exaggerate the scene when he found the body. He portrayed himself as a loyal man, but the enemy was too cunning. He had no choice but to take back Meng Liang's body. Master, you must help second Lang Jun. The head of the entourage was crying on the ground. Tears and mucus were running down his face. Normally, Meng Zhan would have kicked him in the chest. But this time, it was a good chance for him to save his life. When I got second Lang Jun's body back, I found out that second Lang Jun. He was bled to death. The head of the entourage was lying on the ground. Meng Zhan felt another sharp pain in his chest. His right hand clutched the clothes on the left side of his chest. He clenched his teeth and his lips turned blue. Seeing that he was about to pass out again, Meng Zhan pulled himself together with his extraordinary willpower. His eyes were extremely cold. You said. Second Lang Jun was bled to death by Meng Hun. These words were squeezed out through gritted teeth. No wonder Shang-er's body was purple. Even though part of it was rotten, the body was still weirder than a normal person's. Yes. The head of the entourage nodded with difficulty. Tears streamed down his face. I failed to protect second Lang Jun. Master, please allow me to avenge him. When I get my revenge, I will kill myself. I will protect second Lang Jun in the afterlife. Meng Zhan's chest was rising and falling rapidly. His beloved concubine had already held him and helped him breathe. After a long time, so long that the head of the entourage thought he was going to die, Meng Zhan's cold and arrogant voice came into his ears. Forget it. If Shang knew you were so loyal, he would be happy. Meng Zhan said it unwillingly. He glanced at his friend and said stiffly, I must avenge Shang-er. I am the son of the Mangs. The name of the Mangs in Cangzhou is not something a traitor can humiliate. If I don't kill him, I am not a man. At that moment, the head of the entourage seemed to remember something. He thought Meng Zhan's hatred could burn even more. After all, he was Meng Zhan's subordinate. The head of the entourage knew Meng Zhan's character very well. The reason why he could stay calm and spare Meng Zhan's death sentence was because he was worried that there were other people around. He couldn't reveal his true nature. If his friend left after paying his condolences, Meng Zhan would be doomed. So, the head of the entourage played a trick. With a sorrowful expression, he took out a coarse blue cloth from his bosom and untied it. Meng Zhan took a deep breath and forced himself to calm down. He asked, What is this? The head of the entourage answered, This is the evidence that the traitor humiliated the Mangs and fooled us. Meng Zhan grabbed it and read every roll of coarse cloth carefully. The more he read, the more his hands trembled. In the end, he unfolded the largest piece of coarse cloth. The calligraphy on it was written in blood. It had already solidified and darkened. It emitted a pungent smell. Meng Zhan's beloved concubine wanted to go closer to read it, but she was choked by the smell. Those who break their promises are the dogs of the Mangs. Meng Zhan's face turned green as he read the beginning. It was as if someone had slapped him 100 times. The Mangs want to use me as a scapegoat to humiliate my wife and daughter. They will be humiliated even after they die. Meng Zhan's heart sank. He couldn't believe that Meng Hun, who was only a martial artist, could see through his real intention. His hands were still shaking as he unfolded the coarse cloth. He hurried to continue reading. If you want to do this to me, don't blame me for being ruthless. If Meng Zhan doesn't die, how can I face the consequences? Meng Zhan's heart ached. The blue veins on his forehead bulged. His head hurt so much that the world seemed to be shaking. Puff! He spat out another mouthful of blood. Meng Zhan's face was pale and he fell to the ground. The coarse cloth fell to the ground. In just one day, he had spat out blood several times. His life was short because of the damage to his foundation. Chapter 239. 240. The Grain Store Dispute. 1. I thank you on behalf of my husband. Meng Zhan's friend quietly stepped away to avoid Meng Zhan's concubine's bow. Not to mention anything else, but based on the gossip he heard, he felt that the Mengs did not live up to its reputation. He had never heard of the Mengs using a concubine to pretend to be the legitimate son. He didn't want to get involved in this mess. Chief Meng needs to rest after this incident. You can't get angry again in case it hurts your foundation. Before the medical officer could step out of the main street where the Meng residence was located, he was hurriedly called back. He wrote a new prescription and gave a few instructions. His friend took the chance to leave. He was worried that he would hear another scandal if he stayed any longer. Meng Liang died. Everyone in the Meng's family mourned. They wore plain linen clothes. The Meng's army was also ordered to mourn for the second Langjun. Meng Zhan's action was met with a lot of resistance. He was scolded by several elders. Who was Meng Liang? A son of the first wife who was not even 20 years old. To the public, he was the son of the first wife. However, some of the elders who had heard the rumors knew that Meng Liang's identity was different. His identity as the son of the first wife was still a question mark. It was not like the Meng family was so short of people that Meng Liang was the only one. There were still many candidates for the Meng family. A son of the first wife died and the entire Meng's army mourned for him. Who did he think he was? Even if the emperor of Dongqing passed away, he wouldn't be treated like this. More importantly, it was a critical moment. The civil unrest in Song Prefecture was getting worse. Mobs were everywhere. The Meng's army needed to clean up their colleagues. They didn't have time to mourn for a young boy. Speaking of which, Meng Liang was the source of the civil unrest. If it weren't for the fact that the boy was too much of a bastard and made the people angry, the Mengs wouldn't be in such an awkward situation. It was better for him to die. He didn't have a good background anyway. If it weren't for the fact that Meng Zhan loved him so much that he wouldn't give him anything and even ignored the legitimate eldest son of the first wife, the elders wouldn't have cared about Meng Liang. He was just a piece of mud that couldn't be helped. He was a waste of air when alive and a waste of land when dead. Meng Zhan's heart was as hard as steel. He refused to give in even half a step. The two sides were locked in a stalemate. As a result, there were several voices within the Meng family's army. The news of the civil unrest that they had painstakingly concealed seemed to have grown wings and spread among the people. When the people in the neighboring counties and prefectures heard the news, they panicked and felt insecure. The Meng family is truly a sinner. Jiang Pingji pounded her palms and said, "Tell the grain stores to put out the signboards and try to spread it throughout Hejian County. We must let every citizen know that the 3 grain stores will be buying large quantities of cheap grain." Signboards. Suko was startled. What is that? It means to widely advertise. Hire 30 to 50 children or hooligans who are familiar with the roads nearby. Give them some money and let them advertise on the streets. Jiang Pingji explained. Anyway, we must let the people know as soon as possible. Suko's eyes flashed. If it were not for the situation, he would have praised his Langjuan's idea. Nowadays, there were too few people who could read. Even if they put up the signboards at the city gates, not many people would know about the grain stores. The effect was minimal. If they let children or hooligans advertise everywhere, it would be faster and wider than just putting up the signboards. The key was that the labor cost was not high. I'll do it now. Suko calmed himself down, bowed to Jiang Pingji, and left. Wait! Jiang Pingji suddenly shouted and stopped Suko, who was in a hurry to leave. Before we do this, go and find out which grain store has the lowest price. The price we set will always be 20% lower than the lowest price. Suko was dumbfounded. Not the normal price. Jiang Pingji snorted and said, we just need to be kinder than the black-hearted merchants. We are good people, understand? Suko was still dumbfounded. It was different from what he had imagined. Don't worry. The price will not go on. Jiang Pingji said calmly, our price will only be 20% lower than the other grain stores. If they want to compete, they will naturally lower their price. Then we will lower it by 20%. Chapter 240. When Jiang Pingji started to take measures, the price of grain had already soared to more than 9 times the price in peacetime. The aristocratic families had their own granaries, so they didn't have to worry about food and drink. Instead, they could take advantage of this opportunity to sell off the old grain stored in the granary at a high price. On the contrary, the common people had little savings, and their families were about to starve to death. However, the price of grain was rising fiercely. Many people were worried about it. Many women were pacing back and forth in front of the grain stores, waiting for the grain to be cheaper. They didn't expect the price to go up every time. If we don't buy more, we won't even be able to afford a bucket of rice with our savings. You can still afford to buy rice. My husband broke his leg a while ago, and we've spent all our money to buy medicine for him. Today, we even slaughtered the only hen that could lay eggs to make soup for him. I really don't know how we're going to live like this. I don't know what happened. Why is the grain so expensive? If this goes on, the kids at home will have to go hungry. Even if they were hardworking and capable, they had no money and no grain at home. Their families would have to go hungry. The grain store was not a charity. How could the price be lowered just because they were poor? The world is getting more and more difficult every day. A woman sighed and said, a while ago, I was helping to wash the dishes in the tea house at the entrance of the city to earn some pocket money. I heard some soldiers talking about it. It seems that there is a big mess in some county in Sangzhou. It is close to Heijin County. The proximity meant that the flames of war could reach here, and it also meant that countless refugees who had left their homes would flee here. Which family wouldn't tremble in fear when they heard about the war? If their strong young men were conscripted into the army, they might not be able to come back. As for the refugees, if people were in that state, what wouldn't they do besides burning, killing, and looting? Maybe it would be even crueler than robbing people. Many women trembled just thinking about it. At least they had some savings at home, so they could buy grain from the grain store. The other poorer families could only dig weeds in the mountains and peel bark from trees. The food they ate was not even as good as the old sows in their pigsty. Should we go to other grain stores? Maybe there are cheaper ones. A woman in a dark linen robe hesitantly held a basket and looked at the grain store not far away. There were many grain stores in the city. After comparing 3 stores, there was bound to be one that was cheaper. If I had known that this would happen, I would have gone to buy them a long time ago. I thought that it was expensive back then, but who could have known that the price of grain would only get higher by the day? That's right. In the past, my husband thought that I was short-sighted and that the weather was good this year, so the food would be cheaper than before. He thought that I would wait a few more days. But now, it's so much more expensive. I don't know how I'm going to survive. The women walked together, holding each other's hand, chatting with each other. At this moment, a child wearing patched clothes ran over from the corner of the street, laughing and shouting loudly. A woman raised her hand to stop the child and asked carefully, "Hey, what did you just say?" It seemed that this was not the first time the child had been stopped. He answered in a loud voice very naturally. "The grain shop in the Dogtail Alley on Vermilion Bird Street is the cheapest. It's 20% cheaper than the other shops." "How much is 20% cheaper?" The child shook his head. "I don't know. The owner of the grain shop said that it's 20% cheaper." After all, he was just a child. Suko knew that children could not remember the price of grain, so he simply asked them to remember the shortest advertisement. The women looked at each other in confusion. "Should we go and take a look?" They could save as much as they could, even if they had to go around half of the city. "Let's go and take a look. It's not far from here." After a few words, the women had decided where to go. To attract more customers, Jiang Pingji had divided the area where the 3 grain shops were located into 3 parts. With the grain store's location as the center, the mobile advertisements in this area would focus on the grain store. When the women arrived, there was already a long queue in front of the grain shop. Listening to the people's discussion, the price of grain was still high, but it was indeed much cheaper than the other grain shops they had seen before. Well, there are no good things if they are cheap. Could it be that the grain they are selling has bugs, or something else? With their sharp ears, they could hear the discussion from the crowd. Immediately, someone jumped out and said, "Someone bought 2 buckets of grain. I have seen it. It's white and good." There was more than one person who was worried about the quality of the grain in the grain shop. Hearing that, he became even more worried. "That's strange. Others are raising the price, but they are lowering the price. Isn't it said that merchants are black-hearted?" A man who was queuing up to buy food couldn't take it anymore and shouted, "What do you know? Don't you know who the owner of the grain shop is? It's the famous Hu County chief. I heard that Hu County has so much grain that it can rot on the ground. So what if it's cheap? Don't buy it if you don't like it." "Hey, why are you so blunt? How would I know that the owner of the grain shop is Lu Shi?" Ordinary people might not have heard of Lu Shi, but when Hu County chief was mentioned, their first impression was that he was rich, had grain, and had a good heart. With the promotion of the advertisements, the queue in front of the grain shop became longer and longer. Many people who came late were worried that they would not be able to buy grain. At that moment, the manager of the grain shop stood out and bowed to the crowd, saying that the store had enough grain. Outside the crowd, Jiang Pingji and Su Ko were sitting in the carriage. Su Ko looked at the crowd and felt worried. There were so many people buying grain. He was worried that the store would not have enough grain. The effect of the advertisements was beyond his expectation. The queue was still growing. Jiang Pingji could see his worry at first glance. She said calmly, "For the people, the price of grain is still too high. Most of them are just watching and won't buy in large quantities. So, our store of grain will definitely last. By the way, have you prepared the people I asked you to prepare?" Su Ku cupped his hands and said, "Lang Jun, I have arranged everything." "Good." When there are more and more people watching, you can ask them to leave. Jiang Pingji's purpose was to suppress the grain price, not to sell the few thousand don of grain at the high price. Not only did she ask Su Ke to hire children and hooligans to act as mobile advertisements for the grain stores, but she also asked him to prepare a few people. These people were not to fool the people who bought the grain, but to sway the shopkeepers of other grain stores. Jiang Pingji started the price war. On the first day, she created the illusion that there was no limit to the grain store. Naturally, the other grain shops would be nervous. Chapter 241. To improve competitiveness, one had to start with the products themselves, the service attitude, or the price. Nowadays, people just wanted to survive. High-quality services were meaningless. What mattered most was to feed themselves with the least amount of money. Therefore, if other grain stores wanted to compete with Jiang Pingji, they had to lower their prices. Once they lowered their prices, Jiang Pingji would achieve her goal. The price war was always a trap. The party who had the upper hand would fight harder and harder. Those who tried to imitate her could only be led by the nose. Not to mention, her main goal was not to make money. If they tried to compete with her, they would definitely be cheated. The few pawns he had prepared were actually just pawns to confuse the grain shops. Yes, Su Ke answered. Jiang Pingji put down the curtain and looked serious. She suddenly asked him, "Who do you think is responsible for this mess?" Su Ke, the blame. Whose fault? Jiang Pingji asked again. It seemed that Su Ke did not understand the meaning of the word blame. Su Ke thought about it seriously and looked serious. After all, it was a test given by his Lang Jun. If he performed poorly, it would affect his position in her heart. The time they spent together was enough for Su Ke to understand one thing: Lang Jun did not look at other people's conditions, only at their abilities. If he was incompetent in her heart, he would not be put in an important position in the future. However, Lang Jun's question was too broad. Su Ke could not answer it. Is this question hard to answer? Jiang Pingji asked. Su Ke quickly said, I am incompetent, but I have some opinions about this question. On the surface, it should be the Mangzhen Sangzhou that caused the people in Hejian to worry about their livelihood. But after thinking about it carefully, I think it should be more than that. Jiang Pingji did not agree or disagree. She continued to ask, anything else? Su Ke gathered his courage and answered, maybe, it's the problem of the aristocratic families. Jiang Pingji's gaze drifted to Su Ke's face. The audience in the streaming room could clearly see Su Ke's stiff expression. Zwischen Beishijing, don't be like this. You are scaring the young Su Ke. Steak, shredded pork, fine noodles, but Su Ke is really digging his own grave. The streamer's current identity is that of an aristocratic family. To say that all of this is the fault of an aristocratic family in front of an aristocratic family, is simply asking for a beating. Liu Ciji Lianming, #propping chin. That's not right. The streamer doesn't like aristocratic families, okay? This answer is too broad. It's a universal answer, but what I want to know is more detailed inside information. Jiang Pingji wasn't angry because of Su Ke's offense. She was just not satisfied with his answer. Su Ke stood rooted to the ground in a daze. This question is indeed a bit difficult for you. Why don't you think about why the food supply is increasing so rapidly? Why couldn't the government take measures to protect the interests of the people? It had increased by 9 times. The few grain shops seemed to have discussed this beforehand. They raised the prices as they pleased, filling their money bags, but forcing countless people to starve. Su Ke said embarrassedly, most of the grain shops are under the name of the aristocratic families. They have a lot of food, and the government doesn't have such laws, More importantly, most of the officials were from those aristocratic families. Would they deliberately make life difficult for their families? Jiang Pingji didn't look happy. Even though she had achieved some results in suppressing the food price, she still wasn't in a good mood. If she wasn't in a good mood, the others wouldn't either. With that in mind, she was determined to occupy the grain market in Hejin County for the next 2 months. If you were the chief of Hejin County and you wanted to save the people, what would you do? Jiang Pingji threw another question to him. Su Ke complained in his heart. Who didn't know that the chief of Hejin County was just a mascot? He didn't have any power or influence. He only had a title, which couldn't suppress the rampant aristocratic families. Even if he had a bodhisattva's heart, he could only be indifferent when he was in that position. However, Su Ke wasn't an ordinary person. After thinking hard, he came up with a very bold idea. His Langjun always did not play by the rules. His thinking was even more unconstrained and unrestrained. Since that was the case, why didn't he change his way of thinking? Maybe he could get a different answer. Su Ke had a flash of inspiration. He had an idea. If I am the chief of Hejin County, I have no power or influence. I only have the title of the chief. I can't stop the soaring food price. If that's the case, why don't I encourage the grain merchants to continue to raise the price? The higher the better. Jiang Pingji's eyes lit up. She had a faint smile on her lips. The audience in the live streaming room was confused. Didn't you say you wanted to suppress the food price? Why did the host agree with Su Ke's answer? Liu Siji Lianming, I think I understand Su Ke's idea. To encourage the price of food to skyrocket, he secretly sent people to the neighboring counties to promote the food and encourage the grain merchants there to transport the food to Hejin County to sell. When the supply increased and the demand remained the same, the price would naturally decrease. Merchants pursued profits. That was a common saying no matter what era it was. But this method can only be used once. Jiang Pingji nodded. She was very satisfied with Su Ke's answer. After all, he was a talent that she thought highly of. Jiang Pingji hoped that Su Ke could be more useful. After all, she was in dire need of manpower. Before she could find suitable people, she could only make Su Ke more useful. At the same time, Su Ke felt a chill down his spine. He had a vague premonition. There were many customers wandering in front of the other grain stores. Even if they were not going to buy, they were all potential customers. In less than half a day, all those people suddenly disappeared. It made the manager of the grain store, who was ready to make a big profit, very confused. He sent a worker to find out what was going on. Soon, he got a reply. Who is so bold? The manager of the grain store was furious. It was like stealing food from a tiger's mouth. The worker nervously told him the owner of the grain store and then he became silent. It seemed to be a competition between grain stores, but if it was too embarrassing, the power behind each store would be involved. The worker hesitantly asked, "Manager, what should we do?" "Tut, what else can we do? Let's leave it at that. I will go to the manor and ask the head butler." At the same time, many managers of the grain stores in Hejin County made the same decision. Grain stores could not make a lot of money, but it was difficult for them to lose money. The aristocratic families did not take it seriously at first and let the managers make the decisions. The managers thought about it and decided that it was okay to make less money. Since it was a profit anyway, they might as well lower the price to the same. Chapter 242. What is the loose trying to do? The shopkeeper of the grain store slammed the cupboard loudly. His old face was flushed with anger, and blue veins were popping on his forehead. He was suppressing his terrible anger. Who in this world would complain about not earning enough money? There was such a good opportunity in front of him, but the loose jumped out to mess it up. The clerk looked at the deserted store and felt embarrassed. He whispered, "Shopkeeper, should we lower the price too?" If they didn't lower the price, they wouldn't be able to sell their stock. Earning less was better than not earning at all. The shopkeeper of the grain store was so angry that his beard was flying. He had completely lost his rationality. However, he did not want to be led by the nose when it came to lowering the price. "We can't lower the price." The shopkeeper clenched his teeth and said, according to the loose behavior, they must have a lot of grain in their warehouse. They can afford to squander like this. If we lower the price and they continue to lower it, what should we do? Even though the head of the family had given him the power to manage the grain store, if he couldn't make a satisfactory profit every quarter, he would be the one to suffer when the higher-ups questioned him. "Let's wait for a while and find someone to investigate the situation of the Liu mansion." The shopkeeper paced back and forth in the store with his hands behind his back. It seemed like he was going to break the tiles under his feet. The clerk asked, "Should we send someone to investigate their warehouse?" The shopkeeper was so angry that he almost laughed. He grinned and said, "Investigate the warehouse of the Lius. You?" The clerk shook his head like a rattledrum. What a joke. The granary was a money box for the aristocratic families. It was related to their daily meals. An outsider was not only allowed to investigate the granary, but if he was caught, it would be tantamount to poisoning someone's kitchen. It would be fine if he wasn't caught, but if he was, he would completely offend the Lius. The clerk scratched his head and asked the shopkeeper seriously, "Shopkeeper, I know you are the smartest. Do you have any ideas?" Looking at the clerk's flattering smile, the shopkeeper raised his hand and stroked his goatee. His eyes flashed with pride. "Come closer." The two of them whispered in each other's ears. The shop assistant's expression changed from confusion to sudden realization. He admired the shopkeeper's sophistication even more. "Great idea." The clerk patted the shopkeeper's horse. "Shopkeeper, you are so smart." "What is this?" The shopkeeper felt much better and was no longer as angry as before. "When it comes to managing the county and the people, I naturally can't compare to County Chief Liu. But in terms of business, I'm afraid County Chief Liu is just a layman and doesn't know the ropes." If that person really understood, how could he have made such a mistake and tried in vain to keep lowering the price, a crude scheme that harmed others without benefiting himself? In business, business was business. Although County Chief Liu was talented, he was just a boorish man when it came to business. Almost no one would have thought that it was not Liu Shi's doing that the 3 grain stores of the Lius used the method of lowering prices to win over customers. They couldn't be blamed for the misunderstanding. Who asked the former Liu Shi and the current Jiang Pingji to dislike attending poetry gatherings? Don't think that these activities were boring. In fact, it was also an important way to promote oneself. It was the best place to show off one's talent and fame. If he didn't package himself and promote himself, how would others remember him? The former Liu Shi wouldn't have done that, but the current Jiang Pingji disdained to do so. Therefore, in the second branch of the Lius, outsiders always thought that Liu Shi was the head of the family. Naturally, he was the first person they thought of when something happened. Unintentionally, Liu Shi had become Jiang Pingji's scapegoat. In the eyes of outsiders, how could offending Liu Shi and offending Liu Shi's son be the same? Everyone bullied the weak and feared the strong. If it was the former, 99% of people would be afraid. After all, Liu Shi was not someone to be trifled with. If it was the latter, people would probably come to pressure him with all kinds of excuses. Even if they didn't torture you to death, they would still annoy you to death. If they couldn't afford to offend their father, why would they be afraid of the bastard? Of course, if they really did that, they would probably understand a principle. The bastard was even more dangerous than the father. The latter would only make you suffer, while the former would directly kill you. The clerk flattered the shopkeeper. That's right. I think so too. When it comes to making money, no one can be more experienced than you. Let's wait and see. The shopkeeper said decisively. I'd like to see how much grain he has and how many days he can squander. Because they had more grain than they had expected, the purchase limit was not implemented the next day. Jiang Pingji coldly looked at the statistics on the table. It was the price records of 31 grain stores in Heartwarming County. After the first price cut, they seemed to have reached some kind of tacit understanding. Not only did they not follow suit, but they also chose to ignore the 3 grain stores of the Lus. They let their own grain store be deserted, with not a single customer coming in. They did not move at all. Jiang Pingji saw that and sneered. You're quite calm, but that's all. If they chose to lower their prices immediately, the loss would be small. If they continued to be so reserved, she would not be polite. Early the next morning, Jiang Pingji asked Su Ke to do something for her. This. Lang Jun, do you really want to do this? Su Ke's eyes widened. Wouldn't that be too wicked? Jiang Pingji held a roll of books in her hand. She knocked on the table and said angrily, You saw the grand occasion yesterday. Although the people were attracted to the grain stores, not many people actually bought the grain because of the high prices. It was not that there were not many people, but it was less than she had expected. She was not satisfied with the transaction amount. Su Ke did not dare to respond. With the prices of the grain stores yesterday, it would be strange if there were many people who actually bought the grain. Although the prices of the 3 grain stores of the Lus had been lowered twice, it was still higher than the people's consumption level. Another day of price reduction. The people would naturally have the mentality of, wait a little longer, maybe it will be even cheaper. I've read the information my father gave me about Hu County. There is a lot of rain this year, so it should be a bumper harvest year. The drought in the neighboring 2 prefectures is also better than in previous years. The pressure of the food shortage will be much smaller than in previous years, which means that the grain prices will be exceptionally low after the autumn harvest. Jiang Pingji said coldly, We'd better convert the 5,000 don of grain we have into money before the autumn harvest. After the autumn harvest, we can buy the grain at a low price. After that, the price of the grain will increase by several times. If we can't sell it, we will lose money. Although the grain was not a business, who would want to make a few hundred if they could make a profit of 10,000 don? Jiang Pingji lacked everything at the moment. She could only use the method of increasing income and reducing expenditure to the maximum. She wanted to turn the 5,000 don of grain into the biggest profit. Su Ke was silent. So this was the reason why his Lang Jun wanted to cheat the grain stores of the other noble families. Very good and very powerful. He was speechless. Chapter 243. Excluding the 3 grain stores of the Lus, there are still 28 grain stores in Heartwarming County. After lowering their prices yesterday, all of them are looking forward to buying grain. It seems that they are suspicious of our grain storage. If so, why don't we tempt them to buy grain? For 1 grain store, a few thousand don of grain was a lot, but for 28 grain stores, it was nothing. Jiang Pingji had carefully made a budget. She set aside a part of it for the limited purchase, and sold the rest to those suckers at a high price. Su Ke was speechless. Suddenly, he felt lonely, like a hero who had no place to show his skills. His Lang Jun was too capable, and he, who was her right-hand man, felt sad. But will they really do that? Su Ke did not know much about business, so he was a little nervous. In fact, Jiang Pingji did not know much either. After all, she was a genetic warrior, and fighting was the mainstream of her life. Most of the skills and knowledge she learned were related to practical fighting. But she lived in an era where information was extremely advanced, so she could always learn something. She was not an expert, but she could still imitate others. Not to mention the suppression of business in ancient times. Of course, she could handle it. Of course they will. Even if we don't spread the news that we don't have enough grain, they will secretly test us. Jiang Pingji was a layman when it came to business, but when it came to cheating people and maximizing profits, she was the master of it. Whether it was in ancient times or in her previous era, as a general, she was not a reckless or brainless person. On the contrary, most of those people were smart. They looked crude, but they had a lot of tricks up their sleeves. Jiang Pingji was chosen by her old boss, stood out from many candidates, and became the commander of an army. Of course, she was not ordinary. Ask the shopkeepers of the grain stores to pay attention and record the appearance of every person who buys grain and the grain they buy, Jiang Pingji said. If I'm not wrong, those grain stores will send people to secretly buy grain from our grain stores to test us. She continued, what you need to do is to let your people spread the rumor, and at the same time, have the shopkeepers and workers put on a show. Put on a show? What kind of show? Of course, they would secretly say that there was not enough grain in the granary, and let the shopkeepers ask their master what they should do next. As long as the people who came to buy grain accidentally overheard it and brought it back, Jiang Pingji's goal would be achieved. Su Ku sighed in his heart and said, okay, I'll go and do it now. Alright, go ahead. Although Su Ku was young, he was thorough and steady in his work. Jiang Pingji had always been at ease when she handed things over to him. Jiang Pingji's prediction was accurate. After noon, there were indeed a few people who bought a large amount of grain. One of them even bought a whole stone. If it was any other time, any commoner with a little extra money would be able to afford one stone. But now that the price of grain had skyrocketed, a single stone was a huge deal. When the sun was about to set, the clerk of the loose grain store hurriedly ran into the store from the side door. He was so anxious that he didn't even have time to wipe his sweat. He looked at the shopkeeper in panic, as if he had something important to report but couldn't say it directly in front of the other commoners. Seeing that, the shopkeeper put down the customer he was serving and went to a corner to talk with the clerk. One could vaguely hear words like 1,900 don and not enough. The inside of the grain store was very noisy. There were many people buying grain everywhere. It was hard to hear their conversation unless one was paying attention. However, among this batch of people who were buying grain, many of them were spies from other grain stores. Is what you said true? The spy answered, it's true. I heard them say that they have less than 1,900 don of grain. If they continue to sell like this, it won't last more than a few days. After hearing that, the spy pondered for a while and made a decision in his heart. Apart from the 3 grain stores of the Luz, the other 28 grain stores were hoping to make a fortune this time. Seeing that the people who were buying grain had gone to their competitors' stores, they were anxious. 2 of the stores even decided to lower their prices the next day. When they heard the news, they were all excited as if they had been injected with chicken blood. 1,900 don was not much even if it was divided among the 28 grain stores. If they could buy this batch of grain from the Luz, they could naturally continue to raise the price and still make a profit. Now the news of the civil unrest in Sangzhou was getting more and more intense. The refugees not only affected Zhejiang County, but also spread to Hejian County. It was a good opportunity to make a fortune. If they missed this opportunity, they would not get another one. How could they let the Luz ruin it? In a word, buy. Therefore, on the 3rd day, the 3 grain stores of the Luz welcomed a large number of people who were buying grain. It also drove the real buyers to make up their minds to buy grain. They had all heard the rumor that the cheap grain of the loos was running out. If they did not buy now, they would have to buy grain with sky-high prices in the future. If they could not afford it, they would starve to death. On the third day, the business of the grain stores reached its peak. Even when the grain stores were closed, there were still many people who did not buy grain wandering in front of the doors. The shopkeeper and the clerk could only persuade them to leave in a gentle voice, "Today's grain is sold out. If you want to buy more, come back tomorrow. The grain stores are closing now." The people looked at each other. In their hearts, they thought that the shopkeeper was just saying perfunctorily. They were very disappointed. On the fourth day, the business of the grain stores was still good, but they closed before noon, which further confirmed the rumor that the grain stores were running out of grain. Humph, the Lu County chief has made great achievements in governing the region, but he knows nothing about business. He is so stupid to give up a watermelon and throw away a sesame seed. Many people laughed in their hearts. The Lus did make a lot of money, but that was all. If they had been patient, they could have made 5 or 6 times the money, or even more. On the fifth day, the grain stores in Heartwarming County seemed to have reached an agreement. They all adjusted the prices of their grain stores. The prices were set. If they did not want to buy, they could wait for their whole family to starve to death. However, the expected customers did not come. After asking carefully, the shopkeepers of several grain stores almost had a heart attack. They thought that the grain stores of the Lus would not open today, but the people found that they opened earlier than usual. "Hey, what is this?" The people looked at the sign outside the grain stores and did not understand it. "This is a limited purchase." At this time, a man in a green scholar's robe was standing in the crowd with a feather fan in his hand. Who else could it be but Chiguan Rang? What is a limited purchase? Out of 100 people, 99 were illiterate. How could they understand a limited purchase? The people respected the scholar. They all made way for Chiguan Rang so that he could read the sign. He calmly walked forward and read the content of the sign clearly. Then he explained in a way that the people could understand. The grain stores are still open, but each person can only buy 2 days' worth of grain for a family of 4. We will not sell more than that. Limited purchase. They had never seen or heard of such a way of selling. Many people found it hard to get used to it. If this was the case, didn't it mean that they had to go to the grain stores every 2 or 3 days? Why couldn't they sell it all at once? Chapter 244. Although there was cheap food, there was still a restriction on the purchase, which made many people feel disgusted and repelled. Heartwarming County was not a big place, but it was not small either. It was really troublesome to go to a grain store just to buy 1 or 2 days' worth of food. Is there no food in your store? Why do you want to limit the purchase instead of making money? A man's voice came from the crowd. He was wearing sackcloth and his hair was tied up with straw rope. He looked like an ordinary farmer. At this moment, the people gathered in front of the grain store seemed to have been enlightened. They started chattering. "It's okay if there's no food. Why are you tormenting us? There are other stores in Heartwarming County that sell food even if you don't sell. The world is not safe now. What if you run into bad people when you travel so far just for a little food?" What he said was exactly what many people were thinking. They were even more worried. That's right. Taking the risk to travel so far away for such a small amount of food, isn't this harming others? Yes, do you have food or not? Give us a definite answer. If you do, sell it. If you don't waste our time. We can buy from other stores. If we are delayed by you and the price of the food rises again, will you be responsible? You are so evil. I don't see you selling it much cheaper than others. Why are you playing these tricks? Are you going to sell it or not? If not, leave. Many people in the crowd shouted. They were all pointing at the grain store and trying to shake the people's hearts. Heartwarming stood calmly at the side. Others might not be able to tell, but he could tell that those who were trying to sow discord were not malicious. Rather than saying that they were trying to sow discord, it would be more accurate to say that they were trying to stir up the atmosphere and mislead the people. Therefore, he didn't stand out to explain the benefits of the purchase restriction. Instead, he looked at the grain store with a playful smile. He wanted to see what other tricks Lu Langjun had up his sleeves. Seeing that many people were provoked, the manager of the grain store hurriedly lifted his clothes and crossed the threshold. His face was full of fear. He bowed to the crowd, and the noise of the crowd finally calmed down a little. Folks, I'm running a small business. It's all thanks to your help that I can stand firm here in Heijin County. The shopkeeper was lying through his teeth, but the commoners liked to hear such flattering words. Their emotions were once again comforted. Who doesn't know how to say nice things? Do you guys have any food here? It wasn't easy for me to gather enough money to buy more. Why are you trying to limit the purchase? Are you trying to offend me on purpose? Someone in the crowd spoke up with an unreasonable attitude. The shopkeeper was so busy that his forehead was covered in hot sweat. He smiled bitterly and said, "My fellow villagers, your words are harsh. My store had originally set up this limit for the good of everyone. Why is it that in your mouth, it's looking for trouble? Of course, we have plenty of food. Then why did you set a purchase restriction? Do you still want to do business?" Before the shopkeeper could finish his words, he was interrupted by the voice again. At this time, the crowd faintly sympathized with the shopkeeper. His service attitude was quite good, and he was humble as well. Unfortunately, he had encountered someone with a bad temper. How pitiful was he now? Of course we want to do business, but we can't not limit the purchase. The shopkeeper bowed again and said seriously, "Nowadays, the world is not stable. Who doesn't want to fill their own rice tank to the brim? But recently, the price of food has skyrocketed. My fellow villagers have also seen it. You know you're selling at a high price, but you don't know how to sell at a lower price. Who are you trying to fool?" Heartwarming listened to the conversation between the shopkeeper and the shill and almost laughed out loud. Lu Langjun was indeed a clever person. The other party even dared to use such a despicable method. The shopkeeper patted his chest and said to the crowd, "You can't say it like that. Who doesn't want to earn money when doing business?" The crowd listened quietly. The shopkeeper had already memorized the script in his heart and spoke passionately. But business has its own rules. This kind of act of looting a burning house is not something that my store will stoop to. But why is it still marked at such a high price today? It's because we have no other choice. Everyone, think about it. If my store continues to sell at a low price, will the villagers buy more, or will the people who want to take the opportunity to make a fortune buy more? Yesterday, my store and the other two stores sold a total of 2,000 dong. Sold for 2,000 dong. This business was not bad. Since there was so much surplus, why didn't they sell it or limit the purchase? Everyone was confused, but some people already understood what was going on. They guessed that the 2,000 dong were most likely bought by those who wanted to store food and not by the people who really needed it. If we continue to sell at this rate, in less than 7 or 8 days, our store's granary will be emptied. The shopkeeper's words sounded weak. Not to mention 7 or 8 days, they probably wouldn't even last for 2 or 3 days. The owner of the store thought about it and came up with the idea of limiting the purchase so that the people who really need it can buy it. After limiting the purchase, the price will be lower than it is now. No matter how many flowery words there were, they couldn't beat the phrase, after limiting the purchase, the price will be lower than it is now. Nowadays, the food in the store was indeed more expensive than usual, but it was much cheaper than the food that was 9 or 10 times more expensive. Many people could afford it if they gritted their teeth. With that, many people's hearts began to waver and they started to lean towards the store. The shopkeeper took the opportunity to add fuel to the fire and said in a clear voice, "My fellow villagers, although the world is difficult, with the blessings of God, we should have a small harvest this year. In another 2 or 3 months, you should start preparing for the autumn harvest. By then, the food will have recovered and you won't have to worry about starvation." To be honest, the store doesn't make much money by limiting purchases. But if everyone can survive until then, earning less money doesn't matter. At the very least, they would feel at ease. Don't you think that's the case? Business is business, and business has its own principles. Chiguan raised the feather fan in his hand to cover the smile on his face. Lu Longjuan's move was really beautiful. If it were anyone else, they would have been tortured to death by the restriction on the purchase. After all, this move had affected the interests of many people. Unfortunately, Lu Langjun was of noble birth. He was the only legitimate son of the second branch of the Lu family. As long as Lu Shi didn't fall, the gentry in Hejin County would be afraid of him. The restriction on the purchase made many black-hearted merchants eager to make a fortune. So what if they lost money? If they wanted to make a move on Lu Shi, they had to see if Lu Shi would agree. The business of the Lu family's grain store was still booming. There was an endless stream of people buying food. For them, even if they had to travel for a few more hours, it was all worth it as long as they could buy cheap food. This is what a real businessman should be like. Many people sincerely exclaimed, especially when they found out that the other grain stores didn't lower the price, but instead raised the price. They admired them even more. Lanting, this is what you call gaining both fame and fortune. Chapter 245. She smiled and said, "The timing, location, and people are all on my side. It's mostly luck that I can succeed this time." Chiguan nodded in agreement. "It's really luck this time." If Lu Shi was not in the Lus but in Hu County, Jiang Pingji would have to go through a lot of trouble to succeed. Not to mention the brutal methods of assassination. In ordinary business competitions, there were many other dirty methods to kill without spilling blood. Those who were greedy for money would have many ways to ruin her reputation. Even if Jiang Pingji had good intentions, if her opponents wanted to bully her, she would make a big fuss. It was impossible to implement the purchase restriction. The root cause was that the people were too easily fooled. They believed whatever they heard and rarely had the ability to make their own judgments. Based on this situation, the grain price won't be higher than the price set by the grain store. Jiang Pingji took a sip of tea and mumbled, "I hope we can survive until the autumn harvest. That way, the people won't have a large-scale food shortage. We can't let our guard down because of this." After all, the civil unrest in Meng County in Tsang Prefecture has spread to Hejin County and other counties. How to settle the people is a big problem. If they couldn't control the people, the local public security would be greatly reduced. Jiang Pingji raised her eyebrows and said with a smile, "That's the problem of the Hejin County chief and other aristocrats. It's not our turn to worry about it." Chiguan choked. They were both commoners without any official titles. Why would they worry about such things? Jiang Pingji said, "Compared to these things, Wenjing should think about how to be a bridegroom. Wei Nyangzi is still young, so please bear with her." "Of course." Chiguan expression softened a little, revealing a sense of warmth. Jiang Pingji teased Chiguan, and the latter reacted accordingly. On the other side, the streaming room was a bit gloomy. Why? Because Jiang Pingji did not play by the rules. She traveled from the stars to ancient times to be a streamer, so she could be considered a time traveler, right? According to the usual plot of transmigration novels, as long as there was a decent man by her side, he would have a different kind of feeling for her. There could be only one male protagonist, but the friendly male supporting characters had to be from the second row to the third row. After watching the streaming for a few months, only a few men appeared, and only a few of them were attractive. Qiguan Rang was getting married. Brainless smashing jar, I'm not happy. I thought that Qiguan Rang would be the streamer's CP. Sparks of love could be ignited between them. They usually get along quite well. I didn't expect that Qiguan Rang would really get married. It's so frustrating to choose the wrong CP. Hey Yida, I remember that Qiguan Rang is now married for the second time. How do you think he and the streamer are a good match? Cafeteria Daffin Auntie, #rested chin. Although I quite like this style, I feel that Qiguan Rang is not suitable for the streamer. Their personalities overlap in some areas, and they are birds of a feather. They are more like bad friends. Moreover, the streamer is so young. That's right, although I don't know how old the host was in the past, she looks like she's 12 now. She'll only be 13 next year. Chun Lai, starting from 3 years, the highest penalty is death. Raising a chestnut, 3 years of hard work, the death penalty is not a loss. Heart as clear as ice, #rested my chin on my hand. Although the lowly love of the uncle was not bad, I liked the childhood sweetheart even more. Jianyan Dejiba, I like Su Kumur. I don't mind the CP of a loyal dog and its Tsundra master. Zaguoj Chestnut, according to what you said, the young man named Han Yu is also not bad. He and the streamer are a happy quarrelsome CP. Even Lu Shi, a legitimate father, was not worried about his daughter's marriage. The viewers in the streaming room had already begun to dig up all kinds of men that Jiang Pingji had met, hoping to find Jiang Pingji's future husband from among them. Lu Siji Lianming, why are you worrying so much? It's not certain whether the streamer will marry in the future. His words shocked everyone present. The viewers in the streaming room reacted one after another. According to Jiang Pingji's character, there was really no need to worry about that. Lu Siji Lianming, in my opinion, the men you mentioned are not a good match for the streamer. First of all, they are a few years older than the streamer. According to the ancient tradition of early marriage and early childbirth, when the streamer is 17 or 18 years old, they are either married or preparing for a second marriage after their wives pass away. Do you think the streamer will be a mistress or a second wife? The viewer's words made many people feel uncomfortable. Just thinking about that kind of scene was enough to make them feel sick. The streamer's excellence was obvious to all. Wasn't it because of Jiang Pingji's charm that many viewers followed her for so long? If even such a person had to be a mistress or a second wife, it would be like eating delicacies that had been left out overnight. Lu Siji Lianming, the streamer still has a long way to go. It's too early to talk about relationships. The world is so big. There will be more outstanding people. Why should you limit your vision to a few people? Qiguan Rang will not be the streamer's CP. They will only be good friends. Although Jiang Pingji did not care about the bullet screen in the streaming room, Lu Siji Lianming did win her heart. While paying attention to the bullet screen, she chatted happily with Qiguan Rang. Will Lanting go to Shangjing with Lu County Chief soon? Qiguan Rang suddenly brought up the topic and said regretfully, I thought I could invite Lanting to the wedding, but it seems that we are not fated to do so. Well, it's time to leave. The Mengs are going to investigate soon. Although I am confident that I am clean and did not leave any clues, it is hard to say that the Mengs will not suspect me. Jiang Pingji shook her head and said, "Not only that, my father and Mr. Wei Yuan have recommended me to study in Langyi. I will leave here sooner or later. But I can't be there for your wedding, but I will send the gift." It was time to go somewhere else to avoid the storm. Han Yu had said that Jiang Pingji would not be able to find anything if she went to Langya County because Master Yuan Jing was going to take his students to Shangjing to participate in the evaluation. Lu Shi was the general evaluation officer of this year. Jiang Pingji would be going to Shangjing with him and she would meet Master Yuan Jing. Qiguan Rang sighed with emotion. "I don't know when we can meet again." Jiang Pingji smiled and said, "When I need you." They looked at each other and smiled. At that time, Qiguan Rang would also join them to make trouble. But before that, she had to find other talents. She couldn't rely on Suku alone. What if he got sick from exhaustion? Not to mention how furious the shopkeepers of the other grain shops in Hejin County were. After some publicity, the price of grain in Hejin County had gradually stabilized. Although it was still more expensive than usual, ordinary people could still afford it, and their families would not starve to death. Chapter 246. My husband has just come back from the court meeting. How did he become like this? Feng Jin's mother heard from the servants that her husband Feng Ren had come back from the court meeting, so she hurried out of the main room to welcome him. With just one glance, she found that her husband was reprimanded in the court meeting and she felt sorry for him. If he was not reprimanded, how could a neatly dressed husband come back from the court meeting with tea stains on his forehead? There has been civil unrest in Meng County in Cangzhou since a few months ago. Now that a letter has been sent to the palace, it is no wonder that the emperor is not angry. Feng Ren said carelessly. He took the handkerchief from his wife and wiped his face. He sighed and said, "Now the civil unrest is uncontrollable and it has spread to the counties near Cangzhou. People are homeless and bandits are everywhere. The 3 tribes of the northern borderline are demanding an exorbitant price. Of course, the emperor wants to vent his anger." Madame Feng looked serious and said angrily, "My husband is the head of the secretariat, but the emperor doesn't even give him face. If this gets out, how can he deter the other officials in the future? Not to mention the civil unrest of the Meng family in Cangzhou. Those who are not deaf or blind would know something about it. Isn't it his own fault that the emperor only got the letter now? He just wants to vent his anger on my husband." Feng Ren snorted. He did not like what the emperor was doing at the moment. However, his wife had a bad temper, and she was so protective of him. He felt warm in his heart. He could not help but raise his hand to hold Madame Feng's delicate and soft hands. "I am fine. Madam, please don't get angry so easily. Anger hurts the liver. I am worried about you." Madame Feng glanced at Feng Ren and said angrily, "You are going to have a family and a career. You are so old and you are still so improper. It has been so many years, but you are still so shy. It makes me look bad." Feng Ren smiled gently and the couple went back to the main courtyard hand in hand. Madame Feng asked the servants to prepare hot soup so that Feng Ren could take a comfortable bath and change into a clean spring shirt. Alas, even so. Feng Ren sat in front of the table. His wife was holding an embroidery rod and was carefully embroidering a black plum blossom picture. Your behavior has indeed disappointed many officials. They are always having fun in Shangyang Palace and don't care about the outside world. Which emperor did not want to wield the power of the world and lie on the knees of beauties when drunk? Now, the emperor of Dongqing had been practicing the latter. Shangyang Palace was a real harem with 3,000 beauties. His Majesty had also issued a palace order that all the women in the palace were not allowed to wear underwear so that he could have fun at any time. Every time Feng Ren entered the palace, he did not dare to take a second look, for fear that he would see something unsightly. If that was the case, it would have been fine, but the emperor just had to like to go to the homes of his ministers for a short visit. Who knew how many wives of his ministers had been fooled by him? It was absurd beyond compare. Compared to the previous emperor of Dongqing, Emperor Yang of Qing, it was no less frightening. He had ascended the throne for many years, but the number of times he attended court could be counted on one hand. Indulging in beauty, unable to extricate himself. Occasionally, Feng Ren also doubted whether he would die on a woman's belly because of his indulgence in lust. Although the aristocratic families were now in power, this had a lot to do with the emperor's indulgence in sensual pleasures and neglect of court affairs. The more power the aristocratic families had, the more they impeded the imperial power. The more the emperor could not enjoy the pleasure of ruling over the world. He was controlled everywhere, and the more he indulged in sensual pleasures, the less he cared about court affairs, and the more power the aristocratic families had, the more it was a vicious cycle. He was ambitious but did not like to manage court affairs. He wanted to suppress the aristocratic families and regain his power, but he did not have the ability. How could there be such a good thing in the world? The current emperor of Dongqing, other than having more sons than his brother and being able to sleep with several women at night, had nothing else to show. Feng Ren was calm. Even if he was called to the study room by the emperor and smashed a cup of tea, he could still chat with his wife calmly. Who cares? Madame Feng said carelessly, they have been crazy for a long time. Look at you, there's a cut on your forehead. Put some ointment on it and don't eat much for a few days, in case there's a scar left after you recover. Other than the first emperor of Dongqing, who had some achievements and ambition, the others were useless and useless. If it was not for the fact that the Feng family needed people in the imperial court, she would not want her husband to be the head of the secretariat. It was said that the emperor was dead and the aristocratic families were made of iron. No matter how bad the Feng family was, it would not be that bad. It did not matter if the royal family wanted to die or not. Her husband had written 4 or 5 memorials to remind the emperor about the Tsang prefecture and Meng county. However, the emperor was busy with his new favorite. If it was not for important matters, he did not want to see Feng Ren at all. The memorials he wrote 2 years ago were still gathering dust. Why would he read the memorials Feng Ren wrote a few months ago? Now he was angry. What was the use? I am worried about Huayu. He is now with the 4th prince. I don't know if he will run into mobs on the way. The children will have their own fortune. Don't you always say that? Why are you so worried when Erlang has only been away for a few months? Madame Feng put the embroidery cloth beside her and took out a sealed letter from the table. Huayu, you care too little about him. He took the letter and saw that it was written by Lu Shi. Feng Ren said. He only found out about Feng Jin's situation a few years ago. At that time, Feng Jin's character had already formed. He wanted to correct it but was afraid that it would backfire. He could only blame his wife for paying too much attention to the eldest son and loving the youngest son. They neglected the second son. Erlang is already at the age to start a family. Why are you more worried than me? What did Lu Feng write? Feng Ren read quickly. He lowered his eyebrows and smiled. Madam, you just laughed at me for being frivolous. Look at him. He is frivolous. He gave up his job as the county chief and came to be a matchmaker. Madame Feng did not avoid the topic. She picked up the letter and read it carefully. She had an idea. I have never heard of this lady from the Wei family. Feng Jin's brother had been engaged and it was his turn now. So Madame Feng had been looking for suitable ladies for the past 6 months. She was hesitating. I don't know what her temperament is, you can find out if you check. I am afraid that the lady that Lu Shi likes is not too bad. Feng Ren said, the Wei family in Hejin. Huayu can be a good match. If she has a good temperament and Huayu has no objection, she can be chosen. The Feng family was a big family. Feng Jin's brother was the eldest son of the legal wife. His wife would be the future wife of the family. Naturally, they had to carefully select her. Her family background, talent, and appearance must be good. But Feng Jin was the second son of the legal wife, so the requirements were not so strict. It was not that they did not treat Feng Jin well. They were afraid that sisters-in-law with similar status would easily have thoughts that they should not have, which would not be good for the family. Therefore, the status of Feng Jin's wife was not important. They valued her character, talent, and temperament more. If there was a shrewd and ambitious woman who instigated Feng Jin and his brother to fight for the family property, it would not work. Chapter 247. Lu Shi and Feng Ren were friends of gentlemen, and they had a good relationship in private. They usually talked about their literary ideals and political affairs. They rarely talked about their work. This kind of friendship and the way they got along with each other made Feng Ren feel relaxed. Naturally, their relationship was not bad. My husband always said that Lu County Chief was an idiot. I believe it now. Madame Feng put the letter away with a smile. Although it was an encrypted letter, there was nothing shameful in it. It was nothing more than talking about daily life, describing what had happened in the past few years, expressing his longing, and acting as a matchmaker. He talked about how he was about to leave for Shangjing and didn't have a place to stay. He asked Feng Ren to help him arrange a place so that he wouldn't have to sleep in the open. The content was humorous. It didn't sound like the tone of the famous Lu County chief at all. It sounded more like a boy who hadn't grown up. He's even more idiotic. Feng Ren opened his mouth, but he suddenly thought of something and stopped. He said vaguely, anyway, you can't just judge a person by his appearance. He looks beautiful, but inside, he's a pervert. Feng Ren and his wife had been married for many years and their relationship was getting better and better. They talked for a while and got up to have dinner together. At the same time, the news that Feng Ren, the head of the secretariat, was reprimanded by the emperor and even smashed a teacup had spread to all the families in Shangjing. Those with ordinary family backgrounds felt insecure. Those with great power in the court just looked on coldly. They all thought that Feng Ren would be angry and stay at home for a few days after being wronged. They didn't know that he still did what he was supposed to do the next day. Except for the mark on his forehead, there was no difference. Some old officials who were clear-minded couldn't help but sigh when they saw it. The emperor had completely offended Feng Ren. So what if he was the head of the secretariat? There were countless high-ranking officials in the Feng family. Would they care about the position of the head of the secretariat? It seemed to be an important position, but in fact, the emperor was always afraid of Feng Ren and the Feng family. Under such circumstances, how could they expect the Feng family to serve the country wholeheartedly? Feng Ren didn't get angry, not because he had a good temper, but because it wasn't worth getting angry. Due to the civil unrest in Meng County of Tsang Prefecture, the surrounding counties were affected as well. The people were wailing in pain and suffering. Along the way, people in ragged clothes could be seen everywhere. Many of the refugees from Meng County had fled to other counties with their children, creating a huge security and public order problem for the local area. The roving bandits took the opportunity to wreak havoc, burning, killing, and looting. In such a big environment, Hejin County seemed to be exceptionally peaceful. Most of the bandits had been cleaned up by Jiang Pingji. She selected some of them and incorporated them. Not only did they not become a hidden danger, but they contributed to the peace around Hejin County. While other places were immersed in dark clouds, this place seemed peaceful. The purchase restriction in the grain store was carried out smoothly. The other gentry families in Heijin County didn't dare to vent their anger when they saw that the leader was from the Liu family. What was more surprising was that the grain store of the Wei family also took the initiative to adjust the policy and limited the people's purchase at a low price. At least they know how to return the favor, Liu Shi smiled faintly when he heard the news. Jiang Pingji rolled her eyes and asked, "Did father really step forward to be a matchmaker for Jing, and Huayu?" Liu Shi snorted. What else? If they didn't have such a handsome son-in-law, how could the Wei family be so generous? When Jiang Pingji implemented the purchase restriction, although the Wei family didn't kick them when they were down, they were just watching from the sidelines. Now that Jiang Pingji had introduced the purchase restriction, no one would believe it if they didn't have a secret deal. If that's the case, I'm relieved. Huayu is a noble person. He will treat Jingxian well. Jiang Pingji didn't think too much about it. Wei Jingxian marrying Feng Jin was better than marrying Wuma Jun, wasn't it? Other things aside, Feng Jin's character was still trustworthy. Liu Shi secretly shook his head. His daughter was so kind. Based on the current situation, the marriage between Feng Jin and Wei Jingxian seemed to be perfect, but in the future, his daughter might have to bear double the pain, but it was too early to say that. Who knew what the future would be like? Liu Shi skipped the topic and said to Jiang Pingji, "It will be the autumn harvest in a month, and I will be going to Shangjing to meet the emperor. Ask your aunt to prepare the things you will need on the way. It's your first time going out, so you should be well prepared." "Okay." Liu Shi said, "Pick some of the troops to follow us and protect us on the way. The rest will stay in Heijin County." Jiang Pingji's troops had expanded to 1,500 people, and that was the result of her careful selection. She couldn't take all 1,500 people with her. At most, she could take 40 to 50 people with her. The rest had to stay where they were. Jiang Pingji nodded. In fact, she didn't want to expose all of them. The quality of the troops varied. Everyone needed to be polished and trained. Even if Liu Shi didn't say so, she would do it anyway. "Father, don't worry. I have asked Xiaoyu to pick suitable followers. The rest will stay in Heijin County for now. Wenjing will take care of them." Although Qiguan Rang hadn't officially joined the team, Jiang Pingji didn't want to waste such a good labor force. Su Ke definitely couldn't stay, but Meng Hun still couldn't manage a troop of 1,000 people neatly. After all, internal affairs weren't his strong point. Besides, his current identity was a little sensitive, and he needed to avoid the Mengs. Most of the time, he couldn't appear openly. Fortunately, Qiguan Rang would stay in Heijin County. He could more or less take over Su Ke's work, so she didn't have to worry about the troops. Although the departure would take more than a month, the preparations had already begun. In the ancient times, when transportation and information were not developed, it was not easy to travel far. Jiang Pingji habitually broadcast every day. Because the content was monotonous and boring, she didn't meet any interesting people or things. Most of the time, it was the audience who entertained themselves with the bullet screen. Jiang Pingji sometimes read the bullet screen to kill time. Unknowingly, the autumn harvest was approaching. The fields were yellow, and farmers and tenants were working everywhere. The purchase restriction that had lasted for 2 months had also come to an end, and the price of grain had returned to normal. The stone that had been pressing down on everyone's hearts had finally been removed. From the adults to the children, everyone revealed a relaxed and happy smile, temporarily forgetting the chaos in the outside world. The number of the troops stabilized at 1,500 people. Their main task was to train. Occasionally, they would have other additional tasks. For example, farm work. Because the civil unrest hadn't been effectively controlled, the outside world was still relatively chaotic. People were rushing to harvest the grain. They were afraid that the harvest would be ruined if they were late. However, every household was understaffed, so the harvest was not fast. Jiang Pingji happened to hear the tenants talking about it. After discussing with Su Ku, they decided to rent out all the troops to do farm work. They were strong, hardworking, and they only needed to eat their fill every day. Su Ku was speechless. He really didn't want to say that he knew this handsome Lang Jun. Chapter 248. Lang Jun, you mustn't. Su Ku moved quickly, intending to stop Jiang Pingji, who wanted to help. It was not that he thought she was a noble person and could not work like a farmer, but that he was busy enough and did not want to add to the mess. Jiang Pingji turned her head and asked Su Ku in confusion, "Why are you stopping me? There are no monsters in the fields." At that moment, the audience in the streaming room had started to become teachers, teaching Jiang Pingji how to do farm work. Even if she did not know how to do it before, she could now follow the guide given by her friends in the streaming room. Su Ku was looking down on her. Su Ku was speechless. After a while, he said, "Lang Jun, you are a noble person. How can you work like a peasant?" Jiang Pingji tilted her head and looked at him with a faint look in her eyes. "Speak like a human." Su Ku's face turned green. After a while, he said, "We are busy with the autumn harvest. Lang Jun, don't add to the mess." Jiang Pingji was speechless. She did not want to look at the ha on the streaming screen. In the past, it was always Su Ku who felt sorry for him. This time, it was her turn to feel sorry for him. "Liu Siji Lianming, light a candle for this honest boy." He actually said that. "Zuizhen Beishijing, I was drinking and almost choked." Su Ku was looking for trouble. Even if he thought that, he could not say it out loud. I think the streamer's expression is about to change. "Hey, young man, you have to be careful. He is going to make things difficult for you." Mo Wu Huashi, #propping chin. Su Ku is not following the routine. According to the usual routine, he should be secretly moved. After all, the streamer was willing to put down her pride and work in the fields. It was a necessary quality for a wise ruler, but he actually despised the streamer. Yun Qimao, do any of you remember the streamer's background? Speaking of which, did she still see crops in her era? I really wonder if the streamer knew which were grains and which were straws. Jiang Pingji was shot in the knee. She had indeed never seen real crops. It was like the audience in the streaming room had never seen a pig run, but they had eaten pork. But they could not look down on her knowledge just because of that, okay? Host V, don't you have the bullet screen to guide us? Liu Siji Lianming, most of them are from Baidu. I don't know if they are useful. Jiang Pingji was speechless. Nai Bao Bao, actually, I'm curious. Agriculture still existed in the host's era, right? Fully automatic machines are used for harvesting. Jiang Pingji stared at Su Ku silently, but he didn't budge. She squatted on the ridge of the field and looked at the farmers who were working. It looked like he was defeated, but he was actually chatting with the audience in the live broadcast room. Host V, do you know what it means to be a farmer in my time? 2 words, rich. The viewers in the live stream room expressed their shock and sent a series of exclamation marks. How much money can you make from farming? Jiang Pingji thought about it and used a very vivid metaphor to give them a general idea. Host V, all of you have seen the great universal geographical map of Dongqing, right? You know the approximate size of this country. The audience in the live streaming room expressed that they knew about it. After all, the great geographical map of Dongqing was hanging in her study room. It was hard not to see it. In terms of land area, it was about 1/6 of their era's Hua nation, and slightly larger. This was the result of a data guru in the live broadcast room after combining the various data provided by the host. And then, Host V, it looks like a large land area, but it's about the size of a small or medium-sized farm. In other words, the land area of the Emperor of Dongqing is less than that of a small or medium-sized farm owner in her time. The audience in the live streaming room, Liu Siji Lianming, I may have drunk fake wine and watched fake live streams. I suddenly can't look at the term farm owner. Xiao Xiao Gui, can't look at it directly +1. I suddenly feel that my family's rural household is suddenly much more lofty. Moonlight treasure box, can't look at it directly +2. The urban household is trembling. A farm that was 1/6 of the land area of Hua Nation was completely unimaginable. However, would a farm owner be able to manage such a large farm? He should be able to, right? But they couldn't imagine what it would be like. Liu Siji Lianming, wait a minute. I seem to have analyzed a very scary fact. If there were such large farms in the host's time, obviously the Earth could no longer meet the needs of the farm owners. Would there be the existence of agricultural planets? In other words, the host's time was already interstellar. Just like what many interstellar novels imagined, there were many planets in the universe that were suitable for the survival of living creatures. Some planets were specially divided for farming, which gave rise to such terrifying farm owners. The audience in the live streaming room were all excited after being reminded by him. Jiang Pingji didn't know what they were excited about. She quietly looked at the 2 or 3 tenant farmers who were working together on a piece of land. The audience in the live streaming room couldn't imagine how the farm owners in her time managed such a large farm as Dongqing because they had never seen it with their own eyes. Jiang Pingji hadn't seen the autumn harvest with her own eyes, so she couldn't imagine how the farmers harvested the grain. Su Ke saw that Jiang Pingji was so quiet and he felt anxious. He changed his words and said, "If you're really curious, you should get a tenant farmer who is familiar with the field to guide you. The grain seems to be nothing, but if it's harvested improperly, it can easily cause lumbar muscle strain and scratches on the hands and feet." Jiang Pingji tilted her head and looked at him. "Then go find a tenant farmer." The audience in the live streaming room could only copy and paste on Baidu. They were no better than her. Su Ke had no choice but to get up and find an experienced tenant farmer. He hoped that his Lang Jun would know the difficulty and stop tormenting herself. "Why don't you use tools?" Jiang Pingji's understanding of the ancient times was limited. Even if she came to this era and searched for information from books and the outside world, she still needed to see many things with her own eyes. She didn't have the actual objects in her mind, so she couldn't imagine it. The old tenant farmer was in fear and trepidation. "Lang Jun, there are farming tools, but they are rare and the cattle are precious. Usually, 3 or 4 households share them. When one household finishes harvesting, it's the next one's turn. If they are experienced, their speed isn't slow. In fact, it relied more on manpower than the power of tools." Jiang Pingji followed the direction of the old tenant farmer's finger and saw a farmer using rough farming tools. She frowned slightly. She couldn't imagine using manpower to harvest the grain. Not to mention the big farm owners, even the small farm owners wouldn't be able to harvest all the grain in their lifetime. Chapter 249. "Old man, please teach me how to do it." "I'll learn." Jiang Pingji smiled. She rolled the wide hem up to her knees and secured it with a rope, revealing a pair of slender white calves. As for the sleeves, she tied them up with a rope to make it easier for her to walk. "Xiao Xiao Gui, the rope to secure the sleeves looks like it's from Japan." Liu Siji Lianming, sleeves, also known as arm ropes. "They're not from Japan. In fact, people in ancient China used ropes to secure sleeves so that they wouldn't get in the way of their work. But no one was wearing a robe with wide sleeves, so they didn't need it. Well, he was being taught a lesson. Jiang Pingji secured the sleeves with Su Ke's help. She stood beside the old tenant farmer and listened attentively to him teaching her how to harvest the grains. After all, the old tenant farmer had worked in the fields his whole life, so he was very experienced. Although he was old and had gray hair on his temples, he was no slower than the young men. He was even faster than them. At that moment, Su Ke keenly sensed that his Lang Jun's mood was a bit weird. He thought to himself, does Lang Jun think it's too difficult? However, the scene that followed refreshed his worldview and limits. Lang Jun, who was thought to be inattentive, only needed to watch it once. The old tenant farmer told her some things to pay attention to, and she was able to do it by herself. Lang Jun, you're really smart. You're much smarter than my grandson. The old tenant farmer was so happy that he complimented her, but he realized he had said something wrong after he finished. How could they compare the status of his grandson and the Lang Jun in front of him? If his grandson couldn't learn this skill, he would probably starve to death. Lang Jun, on the other hand, could live a luxurious life even though she didn't know what the grains looked like. When he thought of this, the old tenant farmer was so scared that his legs trembled. His face turned pale, and he almost fell to his knees. Unexpectedly, Jiang Pingji revealed a very happy smile and spoke to him in a gentle and soft voice. It's not hard to see, but you need to pay attention to your posture and strength. Otherwise, your whole body will hurt. The old tenant farmer didn't know how to control his posture and strength, but he had accumulated a lifetime's worth of experience. Su Ke stood to the side, and his face turned slightly better. Jiang Pingji didn't seem to realize that the old tenant farmer had said something offensive. Instead, she quickly harvested the rest of the rice. A quarter of an hour later, she sat on the ridge of the field, swinging her two slender white legs. Her forehead was faintly covered in a thin layer of sweat. Lang Jun, do you want to apply some medicine? Su Ke held a small brown bottle in his hand, which contained a plaster that could remove blood stasis and stop bleeding. Jiang Pingji looked at his hand, then looked at her calves and feet, which were scratched by the grains and foreign objects. She understood and shook her head. She pointed to the seat beside her and gestured for him to sit down. That old farmer didn't mean to offend you. Su Ke was sensitive to other people's emotions, and he had a better understanding of his Lang Jun. He knew that she was not in a good mood. No matter how he thought about it, it seemed like the old tenant farmer's words were the only thing that offended him and made him unhappy. However, Su Ke was wrong this time. Jiang Pingji had many flaws. She was capricious, arrogant, and unruly. It seemed to be a common failing of the aristocratic families in this era. However, Jiang Pingji was different from those people. She would not hurt the weak and innocent, not to mention that the old farmer had no ill intentions. Are you pleading on behalf of someone else? Jiang Pingji couldn't help but laugh. She said, Xiaoyu, the premise of pleading is that you have to understand the whole story and know the truth. Otherwise, not only will your pleading fail, but it will also add fuel to the fire. I am not angry because of that. Su Ke said seriously, but you are indeed not in a good mood. Jiang Pingji smiled and asked him in return, then do you know why I am not happy? Su Ke was dumbfounded. He even suspected that it was not that she was in a bad mood, but that she was simply using this as a pretext to torment him. Su Ke cupped his hands in front of his chest. His cheeks were slightly red. I don't understand. Please enlighten me. Jiang Pingji did not answer his question. Instead, she asked, do you think I was a burden when I harvested the grains? Su Ke was speechless. Sure enough, it was directed at him. Before Su Ke could recover from his confusion, Jiang Pingji continued, don't think that I look fine now. In fact, my back is aching. Farm work is not something that can be done with strength. If you don't know how to save energy, your muscles will definitely swell and your whole body will ache. Suko listened to her quietly and looked at her profile. To be honest, he always felt that his Langjun's face was a bit too delicate, like a girl's. But that was the trend nowadays. Men had to put on incense, put on flowers, and dress gorgeously when they went out. A group of enchanting bitches. It was normal for her Langjun to look delicate. After all, she was still young, and it was hard to distinguish her gender. When she got older, the difference would be huge. It's too hard. Jiang Pingji's current physical fitness was trash in her eyes, but compared to her peers and even adult men, she was a crane in a flock of chickens. With such fitness, she actually felt a bit tired after working for 15 minutes on the farm. She felt that it was not worth it. The hard work and the results were completely disproportionate. But even though she thought that way, the others felt that she was very capable and had a high level of understanding. She was no worse than the experienced tenants. They were not from the same era, so there was a huge gap in their thinking. Langjun, you don't have to work so hard, Suko said. Her identity was different from those tenants. The latter needed to rely on the land, but she did not have to do anything to live a luxurious life. You're wrong to think that way. Jiang Pingji clasped her fingers together and rested her elbows on her knees. I personally went down to the fields to experience it. Only then did I feel that the tenants are working hard. The hard work and sweat of the people are not equal to their harvest. Suko was secretly surprised. There were many things that were not equal in this world. If every household had access to more advanced farming tools, it wouldn't take much effort to reap an acre of land without breaking a sweat, and it would increase efficiency. Jiang Pingji murmured. The ideas she had in her head couldn't be implemented in this world. She had to compromise and come up with other ideas. A field that would normally take 2 hours to reap can be done in half a cup of tea's time. Suko was speechless. Did his Langjun? Did she go crazy from working in the fields? I need to go back and think about it. You'll be responsible for the things here. Whoever dares to slack off will be drilled to death by the head instructor. Jiang Pingji seemed to have an idea. She got up and put on the wooden clogs, ignoring Suko. Suko was speechless. Hey, don't stop halfway through. It's so uncomfortable to keep me in suspense. He reached out his hand, but his Langjun walked like he was flying. He could walk in the fields with those wooden clogs as if he was walking on flat ground. Chapter 250. What are you drawing, Langjun? Takshu stroked her long sleeves with one hand and ground an ink block with the other. The air was filled with the fragrance of ink. Jiang Pingji dipped the brush in the ink and started writing on the bamboo paper. The ink lines of different thicknesses were arranged in picturesque disorder on the drawing paper. In a short while, a strange picture was formed. However, no matter how Takshu looked at it, she could not tell what it was. Something useful. Jiang Pingji drew a book from the shelf halfway through. She opened it and read it carefully. Then she sat back at the table and started to make changes on the drawing paper. If it's feasible, it might be of great use. Jiang Pingji wanted to improve the farming tools and use external help to improve work efficiency and save manpower. If she was asked to toss about problems such as mechanical design or aircraft carrier energy core, her academic level would definitely not be able to handle it. However, if it was just designing simple wooden machinery, the difficulty would be greatly reduced. Not to mention, the audience in the live broadcast room could also provide her with friendly reference materials. Therefore, it was not difficult for her to improve the farming tools. The real difficulty was that the tools had to be in line with the current level of technology. She also had to manufacture the tools that she designed. At the same time, she had to consider the cost and maintenance issues. At least, the time and manpower needed to manufacture the tools could not be more than the resources that could be saved by using the tools. Jiang Pingji continued to paint while Takshu stared at her with a confused face. As Lu Shi's personal maid, she had read some books. She was good at writing, but that was all. Nowadays, paintings were more about the artistic conception than the real scene. It was abstract and had meaning. Takshu naturally did not understand three-dimensional paintings. She guessed that no one could understand what she was drawing except for Jiang Pingji and the audience in the streaming room. Lang Jun, it must be very important. Takshu nodded and continued to grind the ink for Jiang Pingji. After a while, she saw that Jiang Pingji had finally stopped. She asked in a low voice, Lang Jun, do you need some hot soup to cleanse yourself? Jiang Pingji rode a horse back to the mansion after finishing the farm work. Her calves were exposed, and there were mud stains on them. Her sleeves were stained, and she was sweating. If the gatekeeper did not recognize her face, he would not have let her in. Just based on her previous appearance, people would believe it if they said that she was a tenant farmer of some family. Yes, go and prepare a set of clean clothes. If you didn't mention it, I wouldn't have realized it. I do feel a little uncomfortable. Jiang Pingji was not a clean freak. After all, she was a genetic warrior in her previous life. When she carried out missions assigned by her superiors, what kind of harsh environment had she not encountered? Not to mention getting half of their bodies covered in mud, it was common for them to be stained with the enemy's blood, flesh, and filth. But now that the conditions allowed it, she didn't like to mistreat herself. Jiang Pingji temporarily turned off the live stream and took a shower. She wore a green Confucian robe and sat in front of the table. Her long hair was still damp. Turning on the live broadcast again, her gaze fell on the drawing paper on the desk. Her brows furrowed imperceptibly before relaxing. Why haven't I seen Xuanmei recently? Jiang Pingji dried her wet hair with a towel in one hand and continued to make changes on the drawing paper with the other. Takshu continued to grind and said, Xuanmei has been keeping watch at night recently. Lang Jun sleeps early, so he naturally did not see her. Why do you want to see her? Oh, Jiang Pingji said, I just remembered something. Didn't I decide to go to Shangjing with my father? Both of you plan to bring only one of them. It's a long journey, and little girls can't take it. So I want to ask if you are willing to follow me. Takshu giggled. Lang Jun, you've forgotten about yourself. You've suffered, let alone me and Xuanmei. Since I'm Lang Jun's maid, I'll follow you wherever you go. There's no reason for me to be unwilling to go. Xuanmei would say the same thing if you asked her. But why do you want me and Xuanmei to stay at home? Jiang Pingji shook her head and answered directly, I'm going to study, not to seek pleasure. I don't need too many people to serve me. Even so, you can't mistreat yourself. Takshu looked at her with hope. I want to follow you. Jiang Pingji did not agree immediately. She only said that she would ask for Xuanmei's opinion. Due to the elimination of some stubborn and cruel bandits, the autumn harvest in Hejin County was relatively peaceful. Plus, there was a small bumper harvest, so there was more or less some surplus grain. Jiang Pingji asked Su Ke to calculate the money earned from the few thousand don of grain and then purchase grain elsewhere at a lower price. Going back and forth, the original 5,000 don of grain could be multiplied. With the grain, Jiang Pingji, the poor person, had a slightly fuller purse. Su Ke was becoming more and more like a meticulous housekeeper. His abacus was crackling, and he could split a penny into two. There was still a lot of room for the grain they earned. He said that it was all because of his Lang Jun. This is, before leaving, Jiang Pingji climbed over the wall and left the manor. She climbed over Wei Yuan's wall again to look for Qiguan Rang. Qiguan Rang, who almost thought that it was a night attack, was speechless. He pulled his cloak together and took a drawing from Jiang Pingji. There was a drawing of a strange object on it. It's an improved farming tool. Jiang Pingji took a sip of tea. But I have too little experience. This kind of imaginary thing can't achieve the desired effect. I'm handing this over to you. I've also talked to the carpentry workshop in the Lu Manor. You can discuss with the carpentry workshop about how to make it into a usable object. Qiguan Rang listened to her in shock. He suddenly thought of the improved crossbow and was speechless. If Lang Jun can solve this problem, you may become a person who is not inferior to the Mahists. It was a pity that Lu Shi's talent was not limited to farming, but to the world. Jiang Pingji ignored his words and continued, do it in private. Don't let anyone know. Qiguan Rang was from this era, so he understood the pros and cons of it. He cupped his hands and said, don't worry, Lanting. Jiang Pingji said, okay. Thank you. Qiguan Rang was smart and suspicious. Jiang Pingji climbed over the wall to look for him in the middle of the night, and it was the night before they left. He put away the drawing and asked, Lang Jun, do you suspect that there's something wrong with you? Yes. Unexpectedly, Jiang Pingji answered the question. But that's not the main reason. It's just one of the reasons. The other reason is that it's convenient for Wenjing to stay in Hejian. I'll be in Langyi for a while, so I won't be able to take care of him. Then. Chapter 251. The next day, before dawn, 4 carriages quietly left the city under the protection of 50 guards. Although the real owners were Lu Shi and his father, they had prepared 4 carriages. Lu Shi had 1 carriage, Jiang Pingji had another, and the respectable servants had another. The last carriage was filled with miscellaneous items such as clothes, food, clean water, money, and other items to keep warm. The parcels of the entourage and guards were also placed in that carriage. That was after several reductions. According to what the second lady and madam who had prepared, there would have been at least 6 carriages. To put it simply, it was not easy to go on a long journey in ancient times when all aspects of living conditions were abnormally backward. The viewers in the streaming room were shocked and learned something new. Jun Mui, when I watched TV series, I felt that the actors and actresses were all light and simple when they went out. They basically brought a servant girl and a manservant. So, those were fake TV series. The streamer's extravagance is the correct way to go out in ancient times. Jinghong Yulong, Tisk, it's really an entourage. It's so awesome. I feel that the streamer didn't suffer a loss on this trip. Many viewers were very envious. They wished they could experience such luxurious treatment for the streamer. Of course, there were some who were more rational. Liu Siji Lianming, so jealous. Can you believe the TV series? Do you know how undeveloped transportation was in ancient times? Not only transportation, but even the roads were the same. Things like courier stations could not be everywhere. It was common to not see a single living person for 3 to 5 days after a long journey. There were no villages and no shops. Without enough food and water, were they going to starve or die of thirst? Those who had the means to travel far would naturally consider all aspects and take into consideration any unexpected situations. Those who did not have the means could only carry a parcel and some dry food. Everything was light and simple. Not only was the speed slow, but they would also encounter all kinds of dangers along the way. The ancient world was not like the modern world that the audience was living in. There were many tall buildings in the modern world, which greatly reduced the living space of wild animals. Many people had eaten pork, but they had never seen a pig run. However, the ancient world was different. There were dangerous animals running around, and snakes often visited homes. Shaggy Gongji, no, did the person above eat dynamite today? I was just envious. Do you have to be so angry? The bullet screen in the streaming room was filled with the smell of gunpowder. Jiang Pingji did not care. She leaned half of her body on the table and rested. They hadn't left Hijin County yet, so the vibration of the carriage was still within an acceptable range. However, as it was approaching noon, the carriage jolted violently. The audience in the live stream room wondered if the carriage would break apart from the jolting. Jinghong Wandering Dragon, all of a sudden. I'm not envious anymore. I can endure it for a while, but after a while, my bones will be shattered. There were even some audience members who said that the camera was shaking so much that their eyes hurt and they felt a little nauseous. He's already on the main road. Jiang Pingji lifted her hand and lifted the curtain of the carriage. The scenery outside had already turned into a rustling autumn scene. Takshu did not sit in the third carriage. Instead, she followed Jiang Pingji. Judging from the time, we should have left the official road by now. Your servant has prepared a cushion so that you won't feel uncomfortable from the bumps. Why was the traffic in ancient times so blocked? Outdated transportation was one of the reasons. Another important reason was that the roads in this era were not good. Apart from the smoothness and spaciousness of the official road, there wasn't even a road anywhere else. The Lu Mansion's carriage had a more advanced shock absorption system, but it was still so bumpy, let alone an ordinary carriage. No need. I'm going out to ride for a while. Jiang Pingji's physical fitness was excellent, but such a bumpy carriage was too much for her, let alone the frail ancient people. Lu Shi was speechless when he saw Jiang Pingji riding on a tall horse. Naughty girl, be careful on the horse, he reminded her. Riding in a carriage was actually more uncomfortable than riding a horse. He thought that his daughter had gotten off because she couldn't stand the bumps. Okay. Jiang Pingji rode the horse and followed the carriages leisurely. The sun gradually rose in the sky and shone on her body, making her feel warm. It was not convenient to travel in ancient times. Fortunately, Lu Shi was experienced and had prepared everything he could. Lu Shi lifted the curtain of the carriage and said to Jiang Pingji, "Let's stop and rest for a while. Eat something." Okay. Jiang Pingji responded and informed the carriages to rest in place. Everyone had something to eat before they continued their journey. Xiaoyu, look at your face. Are you sick? When Su Ke got off the carriage, his pale face caught her attention. Look at his lips, they've turned deathly pale. At this moment, Su Ke felt that his whole body was about to fall apart. His legs gave way and he almost knelt on the ground. In such a difficult situation, his Leng Juan's teasing laughter rang in his ears, making him feel even more hopeless. It took him a long time to straighten his back. Su Ke managed to maintain his elegance and smiled at Jiang Pingji. But the smile was very forced. Set up a campfire over there and boil some water to cook jerky. You can drink some later. If the carriage is too bumpy, you can ride a horse. Jiang Pingji was not worried that Su Ke did not know how to ride a horse. The 6 arts of gentlemen were skills that all students in that era had to master. Su Ke cupped his hands and thanked her. Thank you, Lang Jun. What are you thanking me for? Didn't you ask for it? Jiang Pingji looked him up and down with teasing eyes and said in a low voice, Xuanmei went to see you yesterday, right? Alas, if you weren't a blockhead and didn't understand a girl's mind, you would still have a beautiful companion. Su Ke's face turned pale and then green. He hurriedly said, Lang Jun, don't misunderstand. Xuanmei is not. In a rich family, the Longjuan's personal maids were mostly concubines. How could Su Ku dare to think about it? Why are you in such a hurry? Jiang Pingji approached him and sneered. Xuanmei came back with red eyes. Su Ku kept his mouth shut. I treat her like my own sister. I don't have any other thoughts. Plus, Xuanmei has her own thoughts. She may not be willing to be a concubine of a rich family. She likes you very much. Jiang Pingji opened her mouth and Su Ku lowered his head. What do you think? Ku, rejected Xuanmei. Su Ku's voice was as soft as a mosquito. His cheeks were slightly red. Actually, I don't think Xuanmei's choice is a good one. You are not a good match. Su Ku was not good at the moment, but he had a bright future. Jiang Pingji was confident in Su Ku and herself. There were too few men in that era who had their original intentions. Chapter 252. Jiang Pingji crossed her arms and leaned against the side of the carriage. Su Ku felt more and more uncomfortable. He didn't even know where to put his hands. But that girl is quite silly and stubborn. You should know why she chose to stay in Heijin County, right? Su Ku didn't say anything. He didn't know how to respond. He didn't know at first, but since his Lang Jun said so, he naturally understood. She stayed in Heijin County to take care of his aunt. Xuanmei's character was like her name. She was gentle and very kind. It seems that you understand. Jiang Pingji patted his shoulder and whispered with a smile, if you like Xuanmei, remember to come to me and ask for her hand in marriage. If you don't like her, you should make up your mind as soon as possible. Don't waste her time. Su Ku smiled helplessly. His Longjuan's temperament was too unexpected. The audience in the streaming room witnessed the whole conversation. Many people who liked the master-servant couple expressed their heartache. Streamer, you are not a qualified woman from another world. Do you understand? Also, when did Xuanmei and Su Ku hook up? I understand. Su Ku cupped his hands in front of his chest and kept his head down. Only his exposed ears were slightly red. After a short rest and a full meal, they continued their journey. The surrounding environment became more dangerous after leaving Heijin County. Not only did they have to face man-made harm, but they also had to guard against natural disasters. The distance between each relay station wasn't fixed. Sometimes, it would only take half a day to travel from one relay station to the next, while other times, it would take 3 to 4 days. Fortunately, the carriages were equipped with enough rice and water, so the 50 people in the caravan didn't have to worry too much. The journey was very boring. After 5 or 6 days, even the weak Su Ku gradually got used to the bumpy carriage. Although he was still pale, he was much better than before. In comparison, his ability to adapt was not as good as Takshu, a girl from the inner yard. Under such circumstances, the content of the live stream in the streaming room for the past few days was naturally boring. Having seen the scene of traveling in ancient times with their own eyes, they did not envy Jiang Pingji for being able to travel so majestically and ostentatiously. It was simply suffering. Bingtang Lemon, I was quite envious, but now I only feel sorry for her. I lived on the grasslands and rode a horse before. I know how tiring it is to ride a horse for a long time. Looking at the road, I can imagine how bumpy it is inside the carriage. In short, modern society is better. Tianxia Wudi, all of you are staring at the streamer and the carriage. Am I the only one who feels sorry for the guard who has to walk? I counted and found that each of them had worn out 7 or 8 pairs of straw sandals. While we were resting, I saw someone sitting on the ground and picking the blisters on his feet. Night Yida, you've hit the nail on the head. When I first entered the streaming room, I was wondering why every guard had a string of straw sandals hanging on their shoulders. If I didn't know better, I would have thought that they were weaving straw sandals to sell. Now that I understand, I just feel sad. Lo Si Ji Lianming, I remember when I was in high school, the school organized an excursion in the third year of high school. The whole grade had to walk up and down the mountain on their feet. It was about 20 kilometers. Many people couldn't recover for a week. Over the past few days, these guards had traveled a lot more than they had traveled on foot. They even had to take turns to keep watch at night. A group of people sleeping in the wilderness. The conditions were really tough. Thinking about himself, as long as he had a card or a mobile phone, he could go on an excursion at any time. But in ancient times, it was almost impossible. The water in the water bag is finished. I don't know if there is a water source nearby. Lu Shi took a bite of the dry, hard cake. There was no taste in his mouth. The water bag in his hand was empty. The guards sat in twos and threes. They seemed relaxed, but in fact, they were secretly vigilant of their surroundings. I'll ask someone to look for it. Father, go rest in the carriage. Jiang Pingji took the water bag from him and selected a few guards who were in good condition to look for a clean water source. She could choose not to go, but when it came to survival in the wilderness, no one had more experience than she did. She could find water as fast as possible and avoid the dangers lurking in the forest. Her efficiency was unquestionable. Everyone had a few water bags with them. If they drank a little at a time, they could probably last until the next station. Jiang Pingji had a long knife on her waist. The blade was straight and sharp. If it weren't for her delicate face and short stature, she would have looked valiant and heroic. She raised her hand and chopped the bushes around her with the knife, clearing a relatively clear path. There's a stream half a mile ahead. Jiang Pingji said with certainty. It's not winter now. Snakes, insects, rats, and ants are active. Before she finished her sentence, she suddenly turned her wrist and held the black knife in a backhand grip. The blade and the sword deeply pierced into the tree trunk behind a guard. The guard was so scared that his body stiffened. His forehead was covered in cold sweat, and he didn't dare to move. Because she had walked a lot, her breathing was a little heavy. It's a poisonous snake. She pulled out the knife with a clang. At that moment, everyone realized that the tip of the knife was stained with blood. A poisonous snake with a triangular head and a brown body was nailed to the tree trunk. It was still in the posture of exerting force before it died. If it weren't for Jiang Pingji's quick action, the snake's poisonous fangs would have bitten the guard's neck. Be careful. Jiang Pingji put away the knife. Her expression was still cold, but it gave people an indescribable sense of security. After stumbling for another half a mile, they heard the sound of flowing water. The troops looked at her with awe and admiration. Go get some water. Hurry up. Jiang Pingji stood on a huge rock by the stream and looked into the distance. She didn't find anything unusual. The guards heard her and immediately took down the water bags hanging on their bodies. They squatted by the water and filled it with water. Sans Hisongshu Ningshi, the ancient water source is not polluted. It looks really clean. Nongfu Shangquan Yudiangshuan, it looks clean, but it doesn't mean it's really clean. If you drink it directly, you might get diarrhea. Who knows how many microorganisms are in it? If you drink it, you might be infected by parasites. I think it's safer to boil it first. Jiang Pingji wouldn't be so careless even if the audience in the streaming room didn't remind her. In fact, every time she fetched water, she would ask someone to boil it in the pot and then put it back into the water bag. Lang Jun. While she was reading the comments to kill time, a guard suddenly ran to her with a bloody coat in his hands. What happened? Jiang Pingji looked at the bloody coat that had been soaked in the water and took it. It was a cloak worn by an adult man. The material was exquisite. It was not the coarse cloth or linen that ordinary people usually used. Where did you find it? There were a few cuts on the cloak, and fresh blood was still burning. In other words, the owner of the cloak had been killed not long ago, and he was nearby. Lang Jun, when we were collecting water, the cloak floated down from upstream. Jiang Pingji looked at the cloak, and her eyes flickered. The atmosphere in the streaming room also fell into a strange silence. They all hoped that Jiang Pingji could go over and take a look. Maybe she could even save a life. But they didn't even need to think to know that the owner of the bloody clothes must have encountered bandits who committed murder and robbery in the deep mountains and forests. Or maybe they were being pursued by their enemies. If Jiang Pingji went there, she might be in danger. Kindness was a good quality, but it was not good to bring danger to strangers or the people around you. That was called St. Mary's disease. Coincidentally, the system's voice rang in Jiang Pingji's ears. It had been pretending to be deaf for a long time. Qing Qing, a friend of Meng Zhan from Meng County in Tsang Prefecture. He is currently in an unknown danger. Please save him in half an hour. Once the mission is completed, the host will receive the reward of full breasts. Raise your wrists high and turn around, and your breasts will cover your clothes. If you fail, you will receive a level 6 electric shock as punishment. Please consider carefully and carry out the mission as soon as possible to prevent the target from dying. It was another real-time triggered mission. This time it was a level 6 electric shock. Jiang Pingji was speechless. System, you've been obedient for months. Why did you suddenly appear out of nowhere and cause trouble? What did a human do? Lang Jun, do you want me to go and take a look? The guard asked in a low voice. He was afraid that his voice would attract the attention of the thieves. No need. You go and tell the others to be quiet. Don't let the thieves find out and cause trouble. Jiang Pingji's face was cold. She threw the bloody cloak on the ground without even looking at it. Obviously, people with discerning eyes could tell her decision from her reaction. Yes, I understand. As the saying went, it was better to avoid trouble. There were only a few people who would stand up for injustice. As the guards who were responsible for Lang Juan's safety, they didn't want any unnecessary trouble to happen. Some of the viewers in the streaming room were very anxious. They typed and scolded Jiang Pingji for being cold-blooded and heartless. Some of them could understand it rationally, but they were disappointed emotionally. They wanted to see a streamer who was righteous, not selfish and cold-blooded. At that moment, the system's voice came out. The system gritted its teeth. Don't tell me you want to refuse again. Host, if you don't listen to me, you will definitely regret it. Jiang Pingji sneered secretly. I won't do the mission. What can you do to me? The system said, level 6 electric shock punishment. Aren't you afraid of death? Will you let me die? Jiang Pingji asked secretly. The system choked and said angrily, you don't have to refuse the mission just to spite me. You're wrong. I won't save him just because he is Meng Zhan's best friend, Jiang Pingji replied coldly. The system, I quit. This host is too hard to deal with. I know she hates real-time missions, but does she have to go against me like this? About 10 minutes later, the guards had filled all the water bags. Jiang Pingji said to the crowd, let's go. The system kept trying to stop her in her mind. Jiang Pingji, are you really not going to save him? The viewers in the streaming room are throwing rotten eggs at you. As a streamer, you should create a positive image. If you don't save him today, you will lose fans. Shut up. Jiang Pingji spat out coldly. Her expression was very cold. The system was furious, but it couldn't change Jiang Pingji's mind. It could only snort angrily. At that moment, the guards realized that Lang Jun was leading them to another path. Lang Jun. We're going the wrong way. Chapter 253. Jiang Pingji stopped in her tracks and suddenly tilted her head to look at him. She said, "The path I say is the one." The guard was dumbfounded. He wondered if his Lang Jun had a bad sense of direction and was too shy to let others know about it. "What are you waiting for? Follow me." Jiang Pingji snorted softly and looked askance at him. Her eyes were misty, and she looked strangely proud. Of course, these troops did not understand what it meant to be tsundere, but Jiang Pingji's awkward reaction did touch some people's cuteness. "Yes." The guard responded in a loud voice and followed Jiang Pingji's footsteps closely. The audience in the live broadcast room suddenly reacted, and a guess spread in their hearts. Could it be that the host had changed his mind? Nongfu Shangquan Yudiangshuan, streamer, although it's a virtue to stand up for injustice, you should still act within your means. Compared to a complete stranger, I still think that the safety of the host is more important. Even if you don't do anything, you are not in the wrong. Bingtang Lemon, +1. Streamer, you don't have to change your behavior because of other people's opinions. You only have so few people with you. If you meet a group of bandits, not only will you not be able to save them, but you will also get yourself killed. That's not worth it. There was a cost involved in saving people. Jiang Pingji and her group had only come out to look for water. They did not bring any lethal weapons. There were not many of them and their weapons were not good. If the number of bandits far exceeded Jiang Pingji's, wouldn't it be like sending a lamb into a tiger's den? Yuyide, Tisk, there are so many people who are being held hostage by morality. If the host didn't save them, it meant that he wasn't kind and benevolent. If she was in danger because she tried to save someone, would you keyboard warriors climb through the screen to save her? Host, you must be careful. The viewers in the live stream were very conflicted, and their stance was not firm. Jiang Pingji clearly remembered that there was an ID who angrily scolded her for being cold-blooded. However, when she did something that seemed to be an omen of saving someone, the ID followed the crowd and angrily scolded those who were suspected of moral kidnapping, completely forgetting the contents of the bullet screen that he had previously posted. She sneered coldly in her heart. No matter how noisy the bullet screen was, she ignored it. Liu Sijilianming, what are you arguing about? Is this the first time you've seen the host's personality of not getting up early without benefits? Compared to those fence-sitters, the truly loyal audience members were more rational and maintained their stance. They might not watch the live stream every day, but they could truly understand Jiang Pingji's character. Is she the kind of person who gets carried away by emotions and acts impulsively? Obviously, she wasn't. Although she didn't know why she changed her mind at the last minute, there was one thing she was sure of. Her reason for saving people had nothing to do with the comments of the audience. If Jiang Pingji was the kind of streamer who could be easily persuaded by the audience, she would not be worth the attention of so many die-hard viewers. According to Lao Sijilianming's thoughts, perhaps the reason why she saved him was just because the benefits of saving people were far greater than just standing idly by. Yes, Jiang Pingji was that realistic. You guys keep up, I'll go first. Jiang Pingji nimbly shook off the guards behind her with a few leaps. She stepped on a few boulders beside the waterfall and leaped up. The guards were dumbfounded. Could this be the legendary, leaping onto roofs and vaulting over walls? One of them even wanted to imitate Jiang Pingji's movements, but as soon as his right foot stepped on the first boulder, he suddenly slipped and fell forward, causing him to fall hard. There was a tearing sound in his ears, and his clothes were torn. At that moment, the guards found that the boulders beside the waterfall had become wet and slippery because of the splashing water. They couldn't even stand steadily in straw sandals, let alone Jiang Pingji, who was only wearing a pair of wooden clogs. So, how did Lang Jun get up? What are you waiting for? Hurry up and catch up. If anything happens to Lang Jun, you don't want to live anymore. At that moment, a guard's reprimand pulled them back from the shock. All of them used to be bandits, but after days of intense training and Suku's tireless brainwashing, they had already curbed their savagery. Not only were they loyal to Jiang Pingji, but they also behaved with a sense of righteousness that only a regular army could have. Their mental outlook was completely new. Jiang Pingji was good at martial arts, so she could easily climb up. They were a little stupid, but they could also find their own way. Ma. You go first. Maybe you can survive by jumping into the pool. Listen to me. Go. There was a pool under the waterfall, and it wasn't very high. Ma Am was a good swimmer, so she could survive by jumping into the pool. Ching Ching panted heavily. As he spoke, his wounds, big and small, were affected, and fresh blood kept gushing out. Because of the excessive blood loss, his lips were pale, and his face was stained with blood. Even in such a mess, it was difficult to hide his beauty. After that, he fumbled to pick up the sharp sword lying beside him, and with the tip of the sword on the ground, he struggled to stand up. If we die together. How can I let my husband face evil people alone? The hair of the woman in green next to Ching Ching was messy, and the pearls and jade on her head had long been lost in the escape. She held her husband's hand tightly and said word by word, "If my husband dies here, how can I live?" Ching Ching wanted to persuade her again, but he thought that they were in the wilderness. Even if his wife escaped and luckily avoided the murderous bandits, she couldn't survive in the dangerous jungle. He suddenly felt helpless and could only hold her hand tightly. Tenderness suddenly grew in his heart. Okay. Cough, cough, cough. He coughed up blood. With such a wife, what more can I ask for? Ching Ching took a deep breath, held her fingers tightly, and said reluctantly, "Don't be afraid, Ma Am." At that moment, a series of messy footsteps came from afar. Occasionally, it was mixed with angry curses. Ching Cheng's heart skipped a beat after hearing it. Those powerful bandits had gotten rid of the guards and were chasing after them. Here they are. They escaped pretty fast. More than 40 bandits were all holding shiny knives. Their coarse hemp clothes were stained with blood, but very few of them were really injured. Just kill them. Cut off their heads and take them back. Don't talk so much nonsense. Faintly, some of the bandits' curses were mixed with this kind of dialogue, which made Ching Ching feel cold in his heart. When did the bandits become so powerful that they could kill more than 100 of his guards with only 40 to 50 people? What kind of bandits would kill people but not rob them? Instead, they would cut off the heads of others and take them away. This was obviously not a case of bandits killing people and robbing them, but someone deliberately waiting here to kill him. Ching Cheng's wife was also a heroine with a lot of courage. At this time, she also realized what was going on and looked at her husband with a serious face. Ching Ching gritted his teeth and asked sternly, enduring the severe pain of his wound. "Who sent you?" Chapter 254. He was not an important official in the imperial court. He was just a small official in the county. Although he had some background, he hated the internal strife in the imperial court. Instead, he preferred to stay in small places and laze around. He was also careful in his daily life and would not offend anyone, so, who on earth wanted to kill him and paid a hitman to kill him? Ask the king of hell when you go to hell. The leader of the bandits smiled ferociously, and his eyes fell on the lady behind Ching Ching with evil intentions. Ching Chang's wife was in her early 30s and had 2 sons and a daughter. She knew how to live a good life, took good care of herself, and had a good mentality. Except for her mature and gentle temperament, she was as beautiful as a 16-year-old girl. No wonder these bandits wanted to kill her. Anyway, all they needed to do was cut off Ching Chang's head. It didn't matter how they dealt with the others. In order to catch Ching Ching, the 2 brothers had been waiting in the wild for many months and hadn't even seen a female mosquito. They couldn't stand it anymore. Ching Ching was a man, so he understood the meaning of these people's eyes. His face was cold, and he was so angry that his wound was hurt. Facing dozens of evil eyes, Ching Chang's wife made up her mind and grabbed the sword from Ching Chang's hand. "Honey, I'm leaving now." After saying that, she was about to cut her throat. At this time, the bandits were also approaching. The situation had reached an irreversible point. Anger and hatred filled his chest. At this moment, all kinds of chaotic thoughts filled Ching Chang's mind. The gentle and refined appearance of the past had been completely shattered. If the heavens had eyes and he could escape from death, he would definitely find out who was behind this and tear them to pieces. Clang! Ching Chang's wife wanted to cut her throat, but her wrist was hit by a stone. The sharp sword suddenly fell from her hand and stuck into the ground. Tut, tut, tut. How can a bandit not know the rules? Ha! Ching Ching and his wife didn't see it because of the angle, but the bandits clearly saw who was talking. The person jumped up from the waterfall and stopped Ching Chang's wife from killing herself. At the same time, he spun around and kicked the bandit closest to Ching Ching and his wife in the jaw. Half of the bandit's teeth fell out, his mouth was full of blood, and his jaw was deformed. Although he was still breathing, with that kind of strength, his brain was probably crippled by the kick. Almost in the blink of an eye, that person grabbed another person's hair bun and held a knife in his other hand. The long knife slashed across his neck, causing blood to spurt out. Ching Ching and his wife were also so shocked that they didn't come back to their senses. When they calmed down and took a closer look, they found that the young man in the Confucian robe who suddenly appeared was not as tall as their little daughter. Seeing this, their joy was instantly suppressed. Young friend, these villains are highly skilled in martial arts. There's really no need for you to get involved in this. Before Ching Ching could finish his words, he saw that the man didn't even turn his head. He just crooked his finger at the bandits, and his tone was full of contempt. "I'm here to save this woman. You can do whatever you want to the man." Ching Ching and his wife were dumbfounded. The excited viewers in the live stream were speechless and sent a few colons. Apart from Jiang Pingji, who else could the person who suddenly appeared be? Her proposal was very friendly, but how could the ferocious bandit agree? Based on the fact that Jiang Pingji had crippled one person and killed another, they would not let her go. The system was also confused by Jiang Pingji's capricious behavior. "Didn't you say that you wouldn't do the mission if you didn't save people?" She didn't play by the rules at all, and the system was a little stunned. Jiang Pingji was surprised. "I think his wife is quite beautiful. It's a pity that she died here. I don't care if the man dies or not, but I want to save the woman. If you think I'm doing a mission, I'll kill the man myself after we deal with these bandits. Then I'll fail the mission." The system, it didn't doubt the possibility that Jiang Pingji would do that. In order to resist the system, its host was also trying her best. "Kill them all." The bandits looked at each other and saw the murderous intent in each other's eyes. "Go." Jiang Pingji's lips curled into a sneer. The long knife in her hand was still dripping with blood. So soon, there were people who couldn't help but rush up to die. The streaming room had been open for more than half a year, and the audience was already familiar with Jiang Pingji's temperament of killing people easily. At that moment, except for those who were timid and didn't dare to watch, many of the audience felt their blood boiling. After all, it was really helping people when they saw injustice. The hero complex in wuxia novels was always not as good as it was in the TV series. The streamer was the real deal. No matter how good her acting skills were, it couldn't be so real and hot-blooded. Go ahead, but I'll lose if you cross this line. In terms of arrogance, Jiang Pingji was definitely at the level of an ancestor. As soon as he finished speaking, a few bandits rushed over with their swords raised high. Jiang Pingji's eyes flashed slightly when she saw the situation. Her lower body was as steady as a rock, and her body was fast and agile. Although she looked thin and weak, she was no weaker than any man when it came to strength. She dodged and dodged 2 knife attacks aimed at her fatal parts, and at the same time, she took the knife attacks from several people head-on. The bandits thought that they could kill Jiang Pingji with 1 knife attack, but the moment the knife touched her, it was their hands that were split open. The strong men were shocked by the huge force, and they suddenly took 2 steps back. Their lower bodies were momentarily unsteady. It was also in such a short time that everything was difficult to recover. What great strength! That was also the last thought they had left in the world. Jiang Pingji didn't retreat, but moved forward. The blade cut through the void, leaving a beautiful white shadow. At the same time, a cold breeze swept past her neck, and the temperature of her body suddenly receded. Her vision was dim and her eyes were spinning. Yu Yide, kill. Bingtang Lemon, kill again. Yin Yueja Zhuge Qinmo, 1 more knife. Ji Kongting, still not dead. Jiang Pingji, do you think you're playing a game? Liu Siji Lianming, congratulations to the streamer for completing a perfect 5 consecutive kills. After a while, Jiang Pingji had already seen through many problems, but there were still more questions left in her heart. The people in front of her were not bandits at all. Or rather, they were not authentic bandits. Instead, they were fighters carefully trained by others. The couple behind her was the target of their ambush. The man's name was Qing Qing. Since he could make friends with Meng Zhan in Song Prefecture's Meng County, he was at least from an aristocratic family. What made her wonder was what was so special about this man that the system was afraid of and even wanted to kill him. Yes, the system had an ulterior motive. Even though they had been together for more than half a year, Jiang Pingji still didn't trust the system at all. Even though it issued a real-time task to save Qing Qing, in Jiang Pingji's eyes, its real purpose was to kill Qing Qing. Jiang Pingji's resistance to the system was not a day or two, and her hatred for real-time tasks was also deep in her heart. She boldly guessed that the system was persuading her to complete the task, but in fact, it was to provoke her and make her deliberately go against it. To that end, the system even took out the punishment of level 6 electric shock as reward bait. Chapter 255. In the blink of an eye, Jiang Pingji had cleanly taken away a few heads. His decisive and merciless manner even shocked these orthodox assassins. They were no match for Jiang Pingji, and now they had the intention to retreat. Naturally, they were no match for her. One hesitation and their heads were separated from their bodies. There were more than a dozen corpses lying at Jiang Pingji's feet. Without exception, all of them were killed with one blow. Some died with their throats slit, while others were beheaded with one blow. Their heads flew into the sky and blood splattered all over the ground. Some still had some flesh left. Compared to these people's heavy losses, Jiang Pingji was unscathed. Sticky blood kept dripping from the blade. Go! What are you afraid of? Everyone, go! One of the bandits roared fiercely, but his companions were not encouraged. Instead, they were even more afraid. They were trying to move forward, but they took a small step back without a trace. Their faces were full of hesitation and fear. These people were almost scared out of their wits by Jiang Pingji. They obviously had an overwhelming advantage in terms of numbers, but no one dared to move forward. Who dared to rush to the front? The people who had rushed to the front were now lying on the ground like corpses. The blood that spurted out was still steaming. The more it was like this, the more afraid they were. The broadswords in their hands could not bring them any sense of security. Seeing this, Jiang Pingji sneered coldly. Tisk, cowardly rats. If these people could rush forward together and work together to deal with her, she could still look up to them and treat them a little more seriously. After all, no matter how strong she was, it was impossible for her to ignore the overwhelming number of swords that were swarming toward her. However, they revealed their fear of death after only a dozen of their companions were killed. Then, they developed the thought of retreating in fear. Even if such people were armed with advanced laser weapons, they would still be useless. Jiang Pingji could kill them in minutes. They retreated, but Jiang Pingji would not. She suddenly gathered strength under her feet and moved forward quickly. The distance between the two of them was infinitely shortened. In the eyes of these bandits, Jiang Pingji seemed to suddenly leave her original spot and teleport in front of them. Her speed was frightening. Ghost, the word bandit escaped his mouth. However, before the next word left his mouth, a cold sensation flashed across his throat. The heat of his body poured out from this wound, causing his brain to stop working. Everything in front of him faded, becoming black, white, and gray. It was a one-sided massacre. The one who had the upper hand was not the bandits, who had a large number of people, but Jiang Pingji, who was covered in blood. Ching Ching and his wife were dumbfounded. They had thought that they were going to die, but they didn't expect to come back from the dead at the most desperate time. Mrs. Ching pursed her lips and supported her injured husband to the side to avoid being dragged into the battle. Ching Ching didn't forget what Jiang Pingji had said before. He held his wife's hand tightly, and countless thoughts flashed through his mind. Darling. Ching Cheng's wife looked up at her husband, asking him silently with her eyes. Don't worry, madam. Just wait a little longer. He gently patted the back of his wife's hand to calm her down. While they were talking, Jiang Pingji killed a few more people. Her clothes had long been stained by blood, and her original color couldn't be seen. She looked like a ferocious ghost who had walked out of hell. The bandits were really scared out of their wits. Their legs were trembling, and they were anxious. However, these people always remembered their mission. Since they couldn't do anything to Jiang Pingji, they could kill Ching Ching first. Otherwise, if the news of their mission failure got back, their families would probably die without a burial place. With this idea in mind, the remaining few people joined hands to hold Jiang Pingji back, and the other two went to kill Ching Ching and his wife. Darling. Ching Cheng's wife saw two people rushing out of the chaotic crowd. They raised their knives and intended to cut her husband. She hurriedly stood up and blocked them with her body. Everything happened so fast that it was too fast for her to react. Ching Ching saw it, but he was injured all over and could barely stand with his remaining strength. His wife stood in front of him. When he realized what was going on and wanted to push them away, the two knives were already close to him. Ching Ching lost his voice in fear. My wife. However, neither he nor Ching Cheng's wife, who was waiting for the pain with her eyes closed, saw the knives that were supposed to fall didn't come. The knives that were raised high suddenly stopped at the highest point, as if time had stopped. The expressions of the two bandits also froze at the most ferocious and joyful moment. They seemed to have seen the scene of Ching Ching and his wife splashing blood on the spot, but it was impossible. As I said, you can do whatever you want. If you cross the line, I lose. Jiang Pingji's knife had already left her hand, and the two bandits, who were frozen, were killed by the knife that had disappeared. At that moment, except for the audience in the streaming room, no one knew how Jiang Pingji had done it. Although the two bandits were not side by side, they were not in front of each other either. How could she kill both of them with one knife? Jiang Pingji's back was facing the two bandits, and she was even pinned down by the enemy. How did she do it under such circumstances? The audience was in a life-and-death situation, so they naturally didn't have extra energy to pay attention to it. They couldn't see everything from their current point of view, but the audience in the streaming room could clearly see what had happened at that moment from God's perspective. Liu Siji Lianming, she ran away so fast. I just saw the streamer's sword make a big turn. Yin Yuejia Zhuge Qinmo, what a beautiful double kill. De Zhuangzhu's wife, I screamed just now. My roommates thought something was wrong with me. It was so exciting. Yi Huangyi, the streamer's move just now was so cool. I really want to send you 666. Not only did the audience in the streaming room send a series of 666, but the platform was also flooded with all kinds of gifts. If it had encountered such a large number of gifts in normal times, the system would have come to Jiang Pingji to annoy her, but now it was strangely silent, as if it didn't exist. Others didn't know, but Jiang Pingji knew why the system had such a reaction. Coca-Cola, wait a minute, the streamer doesn't have a weapon now. What should we do? This bullet screen was particularly glaring. Many of the viewers who had sent 666 quivered as they finally noticed this point. In order to save people, Jiang Pingji used a long knife to sneak attack the two bandits. Although she saved Qing Qing and his wife from danger, she also put herself in a desperate situation. She was now unarmed, but the bandits around her who were eyeing her were all holding sharp knives. Chapter 256. He wasn't a reckless or stupid person. He knew that if he reminded Jiang Pingji to be careful, it would remind the other bandits and boost their confidence. The threat of the bandits was not on the same level as that of a killer with a knife and an unarmed young man. However, even without Qing Cheng's reminder, the bandits reacted quickly. They were furious at first, then ecstatic. Let's go. This guy has no weapon. One of the bandits shouted. Everyone's eyes lit up with ecstasy. It was a heaven-sent opportunity. The broadswords in their hands were thirsty for blood. Whether they were weak or not had a weapon in their hands had nothing to do with each other. If Jiang Pingji had a knife, she could at least give them a quick death and they wouldn't feel any pain or torture when they died. But if she didn't have a knife, it would be a torture. The crisp and muffled sounds of bones cracking rose one after another. Even if Qing Qing and his wife left the battlefield, they could still hear the sounds clearly. Not to mention the audience in the streaming room. The superb streaming equipment gave them the most authentic enjoyment. Every time a bandit's hand, finger, leg, or neck was easily broken by Jiang Pingji, they would involuntarily tremble violently, as if the pain had fallen on their bodies, causing them to be startled. Jiang Pingji didn't have a weapon in her hands, but it didn't mean that she had lost her ability to fight. On the contrary, hand-to-hand combat was her strength. As a genetic warrior, how could she not have gone through training in this area? What made people unhappy was that she had practiced the moves hundreds of times in her mind, but her body couldn't keep up with the speed of her thinking. To put it simply, the quality of her body was too poor to satisfy Jiang Pingji. She was not satisfied, but in the eyes of the audience and the people present, her skills were beyond imagination. She was brave and invincible. I really don't know which family this, cough cough cough. Lang Jun is so young and brave. Qing Qing carelessly touched his wound as he spoke. Uncountable pain stimulated his nerves, and his chest was on fire as if it was being licked by a tongue of fire. Ching Cheng's wife secretly sighed. They couldn't even protect themselves now. They didn't know whether the young man was a friend or a foe. Ching Ching seemed to see his wife's worry. He looked down and shook his head, signaling her not to worry. Even though Jiang Pingji had spoken rudely before, if she really had evil intentions towards them, she wouldn't have needed to risk being besieged by the enemy and throw out the weapon in her hand to save them. She could have allowed the bandits to kill people. Since he had made a move, it proved that the other party had no intention of taking their lives. At this time, there was another noise under the waterfall. Ching Cheng and his wife looked at each other and saw the seriousness on each other's faces. Following the sound, he saw a few hands clawing at the edge, and after a while, a few more heads popped out. Ching Cheng quickly gripped the sharp sword in his hand, hesitating whether he should go forward and stab them before they came up. However, what if the people who climbed up weren't bandits but the companions of that young friend? On Ching Cheng's side, the guards who had climbed up with great difficulty were almost scared out of their wits. Lang Jun. The guards who had been struggling to climb up suddenly felt as if they had eaten spinach. They quickly climbed up and pulled out the swords at their waists, trying to help Jiang Pingji out of trouble. However, their Lang Jun was too brave and didn't give them a chance to perform. Bang! Jiang Pingji threw the last body on the ground and stood in the middle of the bodies with a cold face. She looked at the guards quietly. The guards who climbed up awkwardly, for some reason, they felt a little guilty. It was okay to let their Lang Jun take the lead, but as guards, they were not even of any use. It was a great shame. Go back and train well. Jiang Pingji stared at the guards for a few seconds, which directly made them feel guilty. None of the guards dared to look at her in the eyes. They felt guilty. How could they not feel guilty? It took a group of people so long to climb up a waterfall that wasn't very high. Jiang Pingji couldn't bear that kind of speed. If she really needed their help, the bodies would have been cold, so they needed to redouble their training. The guards all showed a bitter smile, but no one dared to refute Jiang Pingji's order. The guards all put their hands together. Yes, Lang Jun. Jiang Pingji was a little satisfied, and her tone finally softened a little. Clean up these bodies, dig a pit, and burn them. Many of the guards secretly felt their teeth hurt. Their Lang Jun was really ruthless. How was she ruthless? Nowadays, people paid attention to returning to their roots. It was fashionable to bury the dead. If they lost a limb when they were alive, they would be disabled when they went to hell. Not only would they be ashamed to meet their ancestors, but they would also be incomplete after reincarnation. Therefore, a full-body burial was very important. But Jiang Pingji's words determined the fate of these people after they died. They couldn't even go to hell after death. So, here was the problem. Was it more miserable to leave their bodies in the wilderness and have them eaten by wild animals, or to die without a full body and be unable to go to hell? The guards dared not refute Jiang Pingji, so they could only silently listen to her orders. After that, Jiang Pingji finally had the time to pay attention to the Qingqing couple. The man was tall and slender. He had a light and gentle temperament. Not to mention his looks, he gave off the impression that he was easy to get along with. He was very approachable. Jiang Pingji analyzed him from head to toe without batting an eyelid. Her eyes darkened slightly. On the other side, Qingqing had a strange feeling in his heart. He had an inexplicable feeling. Jiang Pingji glanced at the woman next to Qingqing and then said to one of the guards, "Do you have medicine with you? Treat this gentleman's wound. It's not a fatal wound, but if it's not treated, it'll be dangerous if he bleeds too much." Yes. The guard naturally brought enough medicine with him. "Thank you." Qingqing's wife took the medicine and bowed to Jiang Pingji. Jiang Pingji didn't go over to ask for more information. Instead, she sat on the side, looking gloomy. Others thought she was in a daze, but in fact, Jiang Pingji was just looking at the reward given by the system. System, congratulations to the streamer for completing the real-time task, saving Qingqing. You have received the reward, full breasts, white wrist high, body smooth, sexy shroud. Please receive the reward at the receiving desk. System, are you not happy? She asked the system in her heart. The system sent her a series of ellipses. This time, I have completed the task you gave me perfectly. Jiang Pingji smiled, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. The system replied, the host finally understands my painstaking efforts. I am very happy. However, after the reply, the system became silent again. It wasn't as noisy as it usually was. Obviously, it wasn't as happy as she expected. Jiang Pingji could even imagine it gritting its teeth in anger. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.